Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. Hey everyone, how you doing? We're going to check out a full album today. We're going to do an album review, listen to each song mostly track by track, I'm thinking today, given the track lengths. And then we're also going to see how it all fits together on, as a whole cohesive work of art, an entire album. Of course, you know what we're checking out. You saw the title of the video. This is Tristania's World of Glass. We have 55 minutes of music ahead of us across 9 tracks. I don't think, everything in here is at least 5 minutes long. Most of the tracks are in the 6 to 7 minute range. Like I said, I think we're going to be stopping after each song to discuss them. I don't think there's going to be many situations where I feel like I can group 2 tracks together. We certainly won't be exploring 3 tracks simultaneously. Well, not simultaneously, but in succession before an analysis segment. With that said, let's dive into it. Let's get this album rolling. We're going to start off with the first track, The Shining Path. Really nice 3 idea right here, big choir. Guitar holding chords on the outside. Drums really driving this. So those snare hits actually come in on 2 and 4 if we feel it in 4. Otherwise, they come in on the and of 2 and the and of 5, is it? We still kind of have a 3 in here. But I kind of feel in a slower 1, 2, 3, 4. That just feels right to me. The guitar is basically staying on this one chord. Lots of compression, white noise, crackling. I think this is the first section with a forward-moving chord progression in the guitars. They've been rather static for the first third of this song. What is that? Kind of feels like a harpsichord, but it's wrong timbre. Maybe it's the reverb on it. Or maybe it's a synth. I like the cymbal work here against the bass kick. Oh, yeah. That one stinger off to the side. Didn't it? Huh. I figured that would have been adapted into this next section, but we just went wholesale back to this idea that we've done before. What is this, the chorus? There's that harpsichord sounding thing back. We didn't have a melody, the vocals over it last time though. That's an interesting sound too. It is kind of like struck strings, but there's also a metallic element to it, almost like layering a piano or a harpsichord with bells, like a glockenspiel. I mean, it's a nice sound. I can't think of a single instrument that embodies that. Bringing the choir back from the beginning. This is the exact line from the opening. The guitars are still singular and... Oh, we do have a rise up here, so it is a slow moving progression. The drums... Yeah, this is the intro. So, will this be the outro then? It's actually a really good place to hear where the snare hits come in against the 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. And it comes in between the 2 and the 3 because it's playing in 4. Yeah, very cool polymetric ideas there. And I like how the extra snare accents there that we didn't have the first time through that section really solidify that 4/4 against the 3 pulse that the choir and guitars are emphasizing. Because the first time around, it's kind of it's a subtle thing, right? If you want to feel the 4, you can find it. The snare is kind of subtle in showcasing that there really isn't anything else that is showing the 4/4 in the first time through that choir section. Pretty much everything is showing the 3. So we get to the end though, we revisit that section, but there's more snare accents, and it really says, hey, you might have missed this the first time, but yeah, this is polymetric. And really leans into that 4 on the snare, even at the end going for a constant quarter note strike on it. It sounds a little off compared to everything else being in 3, but I think it works rather well. And I love that feeling there of that dual time existence. So the song does kind of go full circle, talking about how we start and end on the same idea here. We also, right before that, we finish up with the chorus from quite a bit earlier too. Maybe this is just because of standard metal song structure. Verse, chorus, solo, chorus. You end the song on the chorus. But I feel like the song was a bit more linear than that, because when that chorus came back, it wasn't the third time we were hearing it, it was the second, right? Am I just misremembering that? I don't know. The song just felt really linear to me, and it was like it was a bunch of ideas that were new and fresh, and then there was a point when we started to reverse that and I started to pick up on things from previously, and then that's when we hit the chorus again. That's when we hit the intro again. It almost makes it feel like we went up to a point and we came right back to where we were. Some sort of cyclical component to it. It is called the Shining Path, though. That makes me think of a bit more linearity rather than cyclicality. But I don't know. Can't always have a song title completely dictate what a song does, especially since you can use metaphor and sarcasm and all sorts of linguistic devices to alter the meaning of a phrase. So maybe like the shining path, in which case it is a cycle because we're not actually talking about, a straightforward path anymore, or a path that is cyclical, stories that go on big adventures but wind up exactly where they started too, where nobody learns anything. So yeah, like I said, there's so much that goes into it. All right, what do we talk about first on this song? I mean, we kind of talked about structure first, but I guess I want to talk about roles first. This is what seems to be the most important to me. A lot of the sections of this song all feel very similar to me. And I think that's because many of the instruments are doing the same thing in all of them within the same chord progression and the same general key. And it creates a very similar atmosphere to start from start to finish, even if some of the more nuanced elements of these sections are wildly different from others. I wouldn't say that I would confuse the chorus for the intro, but they do have very similar vibes to them, which allows the song to feel very cohesive. What we have in that is vocals sitting on top carrying melody, whether it's the choir or the single vocalist or even not the growls. They have nothing melodic to them. And typically, when they are present, another instrument is doing something melodic. Although, even that gets a bit rough. Anyways, so yeah, clean vocals. They are always lead melody. Nothing really plays along with that. Towards the end of the song, we had the clean vocals with that harpsichord sounding thing. That was a little bit of counterpoint. It's the only time that the vocals shared melody space with any other instrument. But, otherwise, the vocals sit on top. They're the lead melody. They are what most ears are going to be drawn towards. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they are the singular component for melody on here. Harmony tends to come from the guitars. There's a lot of places where the guitars are just playing chords. Whether it is the very slow chord progression of changing the chord every 4 bars like we had in the intro and outro, or changing the chord every bar like we saw in the chorus. That's what the guitars do. They just play chords. They are this heavy, gritty sound on the outside of this song. The bass gives us a little bit of expansion of the chordal work. They're also primarily in a foundational or harmonic area, giving us a lot of pedal tones alongside the guitars, just really filling in the lower end weight, really being there for the atmosphere, or the sonic component. That isn't to say that the bass only plays pedal tone throughout. There are a couple of really neat runs, but they're usually punctuating or ornamental ideas and nothing that really is there to steal the spotlight or to do something melodic for an extended period of time. And the drums drive the song. They give us both the rhythmic information and the forward momentum and energy. A lot of the instruments are very restrained energy-wise. When we talk about how many notes the vocals or the guitars play every second or every beat or every bar, it's quite a bit on the lower end compared to the drums. If it wasn't for the drums, a lot of this song would feel very laid back. It would feel slow. The drums are what present that momentum, that energy, what makes the song feel like it's driving towards the next idea. They really are the sole component of the song with any sort of larger amount of hits per second. with the only exception to that, I think, being the harpsichord playing the eighth notes at times. It's kind of wild how much of this song wants to sit in where it's at and just kind of lean back and chill out for a little bit. And the drums are like, no, we're going forward. We have places to be. We have places to get to. They run the itinerary. They are the trip planner. They have everything ready to go. They know where we need to be at every point of the day, and they're pulling everybody else along to follow the schedule. And that's how every section is built. And I don't think that's bad. But it does put a lot of weight on the vocals to carry the song. I don't think the guitars or the bass really do anything of interest throughout this song. We do have the guitar solo, and we do have one faster moving guitar riff that we heard in one section. I think it was right before the solo. But for the most part, the guitars are there for the metallic sound. They help bring the metal side of this symphonic metal genre, where the operatic singing and the choir and the expanded instrumentation bring the symphonic side, and they carry all of the harmonic, the expanded harmonic and the melodic weight. The guitars are there just for that metal fluff, to sound angsty. You'll also notice that they are pushed way out to the edges of the mix. They're kind of quiet compared to everything else. If you load up a more traditional metal album with just the traditional, 3 or 4 piece metal band, the guitars make up a majority of the sound. Now, granted, that's also because there's less instruments in a standard 4-piece metal band, but also because the guitars themselves, I think, are more important in a traditional metal song. Whereas here, they are texture, they're flavor. I find that to be really interesting. It is an inversion of the more mainstream style of symphonic metal, where the band, the metal aspect, is the key component, and then you'll have strings on the outside doing chords just to add that extra little bit of warm symphonic components. Just have that sonic spice of the violins there. But, on the other side of things, despite this kind of reducing the metal sound to just a flavor on the outskirts of the song, compositionally, this doesn't really bring a symphonic element to it either. We have the expanded instrumentation, which further adds to the idea of, what a symphonic metal band is. But as far as writing goes, listening to the chord progression, listening to the melodies, the riffs, this is a metal song through and through. I don't think it would take too much work to adapt this to a more traditional metal band. And honestly, there would only be a couple of places where, like, the that layered glockenspiel hammered piano thing going on, and then also the harpsichord section. No, not harp. Dulce. What is it called? Why can't I think of it? It's a row of strings that you hit with hammers, and I can't think of the name of this instrument. Anyways, those would have to be adapted to a guitar. You would kind of get a bit of a timbre shift there, but I think that their core role in the song would be replicated very easily, and you would get a more traditional metal sound out of it without really having to adjust any sort of harmonic components to it, without having to adjust any chord progression components in order to give it more of a metal feeling than possibly a classical one. What I'm saying with all of these words is that this is, on paper, a metal song a lot more than it is a classical song. And I always find this to be an interesting thing. Maybe y'all don't, if you can always skip around the timestamps if this topic isn't of interest to you. But when I hear symphonic metal, I know a lot of people, or I kind of get the idea that a lot of people just want the symphonic flavor. They want to hear some violins. They want to hear some, classically trained vocals. They want to hear an orchestra, maybe. But they're fine with the music still being metal. But when I hear the term symphonic metal, I'm kind of hoping for classical composition. And this is something I've kind of made clear over the years. I don't mind stuff like this. I think it's cool in its own right, and honestly, just from a sonic level, I enjoy it. I do. But I greatly enjoy when a band uses these classical instruments and the expanded instrumentation in, in bands like this, also pairing it with classical style composition, whether that's, Baroque or Renaissance or Romantic or modern classical or, whatever. Just bringing a little bit of spice outside of metal, not just sonically, not just bringing the sounds from outside metal, but also the harmonic and melodic and compositional devices into metal. Bringing in counterpoint, bringing in motifs and canons and all sorts of ideas to expand what metal typically does. Granted, this typically is placed into a more progressive symphonic metal genre. I don't know if that's a real genre, but we're definitely talking about something a bit more progressive compositionally, but that is what I love. What I really dig into. If I'm going to get into symphonic metal, I want the composition to match the book cover, you know? And I don't always think that that's here, but I do think this is interesting that we get the inversion of what we normally see, which is a heavy focus on metal and a light touch of the symphonic side. We're getting a lot of the symphonic side with the metal being the light touch. It's still the foundation of the song, but it's what exists around the outskirts of it all. The drumming, I think, is really the most metallic and aggressive component to this and what solidifies it as a metal track. What else? I feel like there's so much I should be bringing up, but it just didn't stand out to me on this track. And I think that's primarily because mentally I've kind of reduced a lot of these ideas down to roles and ideas, which is what I always do anyways. This is how, people are like, dude, how do you remember a song from 30 minutes ago and still talk about it in detail 40, 50 minutes into a reaction video? It's the system of tags and reduction of ideas and, remembering specific words that might help me, help jog my memory about something. And so I kind of have reduced the guitars down to the harmonic chord device and the vocals as lead melody. And because of that reduction, I think I am missing a little bit of the expanded ideas that I felt while listening to it. I feel like the way that I've talked about it is almost too unfocused. It's too generalized. And like I said, usually that helps. But in this case, I think I'm missing something, and unfortunately, I just can't figure out what that is. I think the song works a lot better than how I've described it, but I can't quite put my finger on why. What specifically about this song ends up working? Is it the callbacks? Is it bringing that second chorus in? Is it the vocal contrast, having the cleans, the choir, and the harshes? Is it ending where we began, but with a slight variation on it? The drums doing something new. I think the guitars were doing something new there too. No, it wasn't the guitars. They were just playing the chords. Yeah, see, that's the thing. I don't know. I think if someone described this song to me in the way that I just broke it down in the last 15 minutes, I would not be interested in it. But listening to it, there's something that does catch my ear. I don't think it's something I would want to put on multiple times. I think it's not necessarily my cup of tea to begin with, but I do think it would wear out its welcome rather quickly. But I would want a second listen off of that first track at least. So there's something in the music that I haven't quite captured yet. And I think that's what I think that's what I want to look forward to in the next few tracks, is to try to pin down what that secret spice is, the thing to the recipe that elevates it and turns it into something of a family recipe rather than just something you would find online. I don't know why I always use food and recipes and spices for my metaphors. It just works really well. And I've talked about all the instruments too. There's not a lot of dynamics on here. I guess I'm just going to hit some lyrics. I feel like this is a bit short of a analysis for this opening track, but I have hit on most of the stuff I want to, and I have plenty of time to continue to develop my ideas and opinions on the album and their style and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, let me read some lyrics and see what's going on there. So this song is a witch burning from the perspective of the witch, I think. It says, "Don't care if I choke. Sacrifice me for my sins, for my beliefs. Spit at me, die with me. For when I'm gone, death will come to you." It says, "Sacrifice her life to fire," over and over and over again after this. The chorus says that the flames went high to lick the skin on her chin. The words, she said, for those words she would die. The crowd circles around her, praising their merciful God. I love the bite of that. Says her screams got weaker. They shouted heathen at her. The children that were once loving now throw rocks with their small hands. That's pretty much the song. There's a second verse in here that I think talks about moments prior to this, as they found her bleeding in the dark of night. They came creeping and asked if she was one of the devil's own kind. We get to the chorus, and instead of having the flames licking her chin, it says that it says, "Fear your thoughts and let the Father judge them. Walk the shining path and guide the weakling along." It goes to the idea of the crowds around her screaming heathen, but instead of talking about the children with the rocks, it says, "Hunt down the profane and put them to the torch." Finally, it ends, it says, "Burn me on the fire, call me a liar, shout at me, cry for me, but when I'm gone, death will come to me." And it just seems to be about a person being burned and being defiant to the very end. Never bringing themselves down to begging for their life or anything, being proud to the final moment. It never actually states that she's a witch at all, or a Satan worshiper, or whatever. It asks at one time, "Are you one of the devil's own kind?" But that's the only allusion to any sort of supernatural accusation here. So a lot of this, I feel, it relates to witches, Salem trials, stuff like that. But it could easily relate to any sort of religious accusation and death sentence for it. But, it doesn't actually confirm or deny if this person is a witch. We don't actually get to see them die and see the aftermath of the burning, I would say. And so this could take on a bit of social criticism that typically, anything witch hunt related usually does, with the death and murder of women and their placement in society and all that stuff that's been well tread, that I don't really think I can add anything to as far as the conversation goes. Because, like I said, it doesn't state whether this person was actually a witch or not, which means that there's a chance they were burned simply for being a woman who might have had some skills that they deemed unwomanly, maybe able to heal stuff in a supernatural way. Maybe she had some beakers and was conducting science, but that's witchcraft, this kind of stuff. So like I said, it might just be a regular old witch burning story on the surface, or there might be a secondary layer to it. It doesn't really lean into any of that secondary layer, but it comes with the territory of witch trials. So, alright, we're off to a great happy start to this album, aren't we? Now, the next song is called Wormwood, and that sounds familiar to me. But it doesn't look like we've ever done a full reaction to Tristania, which means we've only done them on live stream. I'll have to look that up later and see if we've done Well, actually, I'll probably know once the song starts. Be like, oh yeah, dude, this sounds familiar. Let's dive into it. See what's going on with Wormwood. What language are they singing in? Oh, I like the choir alongside the growls. Something I didn't talk about last time is it's very theatric. So here we get to listen to a little bit more of the bass. So we get a little bit more guitar movement here. We have a violin over here that's very legato. As soon as I said that, it goes to that that syncopated short rhythm, moving from legato to staccato playing. The acoustic guitars, just chords, continuing on that tradition of what the guitars have been doing. I do like the dual vocal layers. Bringing back. They've switched. The clean and the warbly harshes were in different places the first time we heard that. They've been mirrored this time. Also, I think I've cracked why this works better than it does when dissected down to like core components. We'll talk about that first. very neat duet idea. A center instrument and then a second instrument kind of moving its placement around. Another section though where we return to something earlier where I was hoping for an expansion of where we were. I would have liked to see that violin duet section evolve into something, even just use parts of it underneath this. Same thing I said about the end of the bridge coming into the final chorus on Shining Path. Oh, what? You only played half of that? I thought it was going to run into the next track, given that there was only 1 second left, but they just cut the... Well, I don't know if they cut the lyrical idea in half, but the musical idea, we only got to the middle of that progression. Alright. Here we go. Alright, here is the missing piece to the puzzle. This isn't symphonic metal. I was coming at this from the totally wrong perspective. Symphonic metal, even when metal is the core and the symphonic element is more of a spice or a flavor, is still focused on melody and riff. Whether you have a clean vocalist or your vocalist is growling and you have sick guitar riffs going on, there is this attention towards pitched movement along semi-linear ideas of shifting rhythms. That's just a weird way to describe riffs and melody lines. They are still the most important part. There are a few subsets in metal that don't focus too much on the riff. They're atmospherically driven. That's what this is. The more I thought about this, it is so much more than the sum of its parts. So much more. Yes, the guitars are mostly doing chords, even in the verse to this, where we have the little bit of movement in that guitar line that I hummed along with the first time around. That's only half of it, and even part of that is just pedal tone hitting eighth notes between the two moving licks, but the back half of this entire riff is the final bit of the chord progression just playing chords. Even when they're actually moving, they still return back to a very foundational harmonic component in half of their riff. Anytime that I'm really listening to the song, I start to get the idea that it's building an atmosphere, a feeling, a vibe, an aesthetic, and just sitting within it. Which actually makes sense. I said something like this during the Shining Paths analysis, not the whole song just wanted to sit within a vibe. And it was the drums dragging everything along, but without the drums doing that, the drums are a bit chiller on this track. Kind of more in line with the rest of the band. That's when things clicked with me. This is doom metal. Doom metal is a bit on the slower side. It is less riff oriented, and the riffs that do exist, well, at least in the few bands y'all have shown me, tend to be on like these really long patterns. It might be an 8-bar phrase, but that 8-bar phrase takes like 40 seconds at doom speeds. And so it's tough to hear it as a full linear idea because of how slow it moves. And so it ends up being really focused on the weight, the feeling, the emotion of the song, not on the technical elements of it. If you focus on any specific component of doom metal, you're going to be underwhelmed. It's how it all comes together and presents a whole idea. And that's exactly what Tristania has done on both of these, plus they are a bit on the slower side. the polymetric ideas and the faster, more energetic drums on Shining Path kind of disguised it a little bit, but Wormwood puts it in full focus and clarity. This is doom metal. And so you have to take the whole thing in, which is why in the moment when I'm listening to it, it works. But when I started dissecting it, figuring out how everything worked, what everything was doing, it felt underwhelming. Because each individual instrument isn't doing anything of interest, really. They're not doing anything that is ear-catching on its own. It's how it all works together. It's like focusing on a single piece of a jigsaw puzzle and saying, oh, it's not a work of art, is it? Sort of looks like a piece of something larger. It's not really too impressive, is it? I mean, it'd be dumb to hear something like that. Of course not. It's designed to be with its other 99 pieces. Or 999, or 99,999 for some of you puzzle fans out there who like the big stuff. And the same way works here. I can go into detail, and it's helpful in ways, especially if you want to make doom metal, to figure out how all the pieces work. But in understanding the song, no. I don't think that was too useful to dig in so deep as I did. Because the song falls apart. Ah, man, that's not fair. I was going to say it falls apart under such intense scrutiny. I don't think that's true. There's just less to glean about each individual component than there is in understanding the whole of it. Which kind of leads towards something that I didn't talk about at all for the last song, and I really should have. And it was the thing that, it was right there at the end of my nose. I just couldn't see it. Atmosphere. That's what these two songs have absolutely nailed. They're dreary. They're heavy. But what I find interesting about it is that the music itself, especially the guitars, drums, bass, and even some of the choir work, carries this weight, this heaviness. It's what makes the song feel like it kind of drags down a little bit. But the other side of the choir, especially the higher end bits of the choir and the female vocals, they carry a brightness that kind of sits and juxtapose the darkness of the music. I find that really interesting to have such, I was going to say such beauty, but I don't think necessarily that the metallic side isn't beautiful either. It just tends to be grittier with all the compression on both the drums and the instruments versus the even the harsh vocals. Again, compression. And just to compare that to the clarity and the more traditional clean technique of the choir and female vocals, we have this bit of cleanly perfection versus gritty darkness. And I think that's a really interesting contrast here. I think it is mostly for aesthetic purposes, though. I don't have any way of tying that division to the Shining Path's lyrics in any way. It is just a song that's heartbreaking. I don't really see any duality within it. So we'll have to see how Wormwood works on the lyrical side, but it quite possibly might just be the way that they operate. And it's not even necessarily something I would say is distinctly Tristania. There is a ton of symphonic metal and even symphonic doom metal. I don't know if that's a technical subgenre or not, of pairing grittier, heavier metal sounds with operatic and more academically trained or traditionally trained vocal styles, especially with women fronting these types of bands. That this sound is, like I said, is not necessarily unique to them. So it's quite possible that it's more of an aesthetic choice than one that's designed specifically to fit with the themes of the lyrics. Now, with that said, I don't know where Tristania fits into the larger narrative and history of this style of music. To say that they sound like many other bands may not be fair if they were one of the originators of this sound. I run into this all the time. I'm like, oh, this band sounds like this band, and someone inevitably will hit me up in the comics. Well, this band came before the other band, so really they sound like them. It's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's not wrong, but dude, you're missing the point of what I'm saying. This album came out in 2001, though. I don't know when Tristania's first album came out. Looks like maybe 1998. Oh, Beyond the Veil. I recognize that album cover. We have checked that out multiple times. We've done a full reaction to something off of that too, right? I don't know. Maybe we haven't checked out anything from World of Glass though. And Wormwood, that song didn't ring any bells for me at all. So they had a good run of 98 to 2013. 6 albums total. I mean, 98, they might have been at the forefront of this sound. I don't know. Y'all will have to let me know the context for that. But I still stand that at least in 2024, this is a very common sound, with many bands becoming quite popular within this, this, I guess you could call it a blueprint, a sonic palette. So, again, maybe it has nothing to do with the themes of the album. Now, within that idea of atmosphere, though, I think that makes the choir an interesting choice, a very smart choice on top of that, but an interesting one, because we already have 2 vocalists. We have a harsh vocalist and a clean vocalist, which I often wonder if that was necessary, right? Because I'm thinking back to the 90s, metal is very male-dominated. And maybe you really needed a harsher, aggressive male vocalist to break in, to get a sort of an audience. I don't know if this was a necessity or something that they've always planned to have these 2 sounds. I love it. I'm a huge fan of multiple vocalists. I'm a huge fan of pairing cleans with harshes, but I do see this in a lot of bands. And it even reminds me, what was it, like 2000, 2001, with Evanescence breaking into the rock scene, her first single had to have a male supporting vocalist on it. The record label demanded it. And that's why Wake Me Up had the dude from 12 Stones. What was that band's name? It's weird because I even saw them in concert. I can't think of Paul something, right? Anyways, that was a record label decision. They didn't think that she would be able to break into the rock scene as a solo female-fronted group. And she's been pretty, if I understand right, she's been pretty salty about that ever since, and she performs it live without the male vocal parts in it. And so, this is around the same time. Did you have to have a guy there to be, a metal band, to be accepted by the guys, to get that fandom, I don't know, it's something I've always wondered about because you see it so often. But anyways, that was like a tangent. I didn't even want to talk about that. We have the 2 vocalists already. Why does my brain do this? We have the 2 vocalists already. We're adding a choir in there on top of that. And the choir isn't just something to be used occasionally. Granted, it isn't used throughout all of the songs, but it isn't also something that we just heard in the first track, given that we've heard it in both of these tracks, in multiple sections of both of these tracks. I'm going to assume that they're going to be a recurring element of the album, not something to be used sparingly in a track or 2, but something that is a core component of their composition process and a core component of their sound. So we have 3 vocal styles in here. What does the choir bring that the other 2 vocals don't? To me, drama, theatrics. It adds an extra layer to the song by giving it almost a musical component to it. Not like it's bringing something music based, but like musical theater. It almost feels like a real story being. Geez, that's condescending to music. I don't know. It's just bringing the feeling of musical theater to the song. There's also, I think, a little bit of legitimacy or seriousness to it. I don't know how serious metal was taken in the late 90s, early 2000s. I've never really had a view of it as being taken too seriously, but I was still single digits at the time, age wise, so I'm not going to say I had my finger on the pulse of what was happening in the world of metal at the end of the 90s. Um, but I think it does kind of, especially since I think the vocals were in Latin, right? So it brings this sophisticated edge to the song. And when we combine that extra sophistication or the perception of sophistication with the extra weight of almost feeling like a narrative device to the song, it brings in the theatrical side that I think increases the weightiness of the song. I think without it, the songs would feel a bit less punchy, have less impact in the atmospheres they're trying to craft. And a lot of that weight and impact come from the inclusion of the choir. And I think you'll notice this moving forward when the choir is there. The songs feel very, very serious, very heavy, very dense. When the choir isn't there, it feels a bit more metally. And I don't want to say that it feels less serious because of that, but in contrast to it, I do feel that it kind of lightens up a little bit and leans more towards the campiness of metal than the seriousness of theater. And yes, there is a little bit of sarcasm in that, but I kind of want to get that point across. Um, and I think trying to get away from the camp of metal might have been another reason for the expanded instrumentation as well. I do think that these two songs feel dated in a way that I'm not quite sure how to vocalize yet. They definitely sound of their time. I don't know if that's a production thing or a compositional thing yet. I'm still trying to suss that one out. But it does feel less campy than the metal that I think of at the end of the 90s, early 2000s. And I associate a level of camp with a lot of metal. I don't know if everyone does. Metal is just such a heightened genre. It's really tough to take it seriously at times unless you kind of bring that down and turn it into something a bit more self-serious. And I think that they attempted to do that by using these extra instruments, bringing in the choir and the, I don't know, the plucked dulcimer. Is that what I'm thinking of? I don't know. And the strings and stuff like this. Speaking of strings and expanded ideas, there is a split harmony to this. While the guitars are playing what I would call a pretty typical metal chord progressions, inside pretty typical metal pentatonic stuff, the choir is not. The choir is using an expanded harmonic vocabulary. They're generally, I think, taking the 5 or so notes that the guitars are using to build their chords and scale off of, and just expanding that, taking those 5 as a jumping off point and putting in an extra 2 or 3 in order to color what the guitars are doing as a harmonic foundation, and to color that in different directions and allow for a bit more expression emotionally in the harmonic component. It's also what gives it a little bit of that classical vibe at times without really saying, oh, this is definitely classical music. It's more of a spice, and it is because of those couple of extra notes that they'll toss in from time to time that expand on what the guitars are already doing. It's what makes it not really feel like straightforward metal a lot of the times, while definitely being like a 70% metal foundation to the song and everything else being a little bit extra to it. I think that's a very neat way to do it. They're not the only band. I've commented on bands doing this before. It's a smart way to go about things, though, allowing your guitars to sound like they're playing traditional metal and not like they're trying to play classical music on an electric guitar, while allowing your song as a whole to take on these extra emotional properties and have these denser, more nuanced atmospheres to them, which is key if you're wanting to make an atmospheric doom metal album with a little bit more weight and impact behind its punch. It's a smart idea. I really like that they went this direction on it. But not everything completely works for me. This is something I touched on during the reaction to The Shining Path and Wormwood, but I didn't talk about it in the analysis for track 1. I would just like a little bit more connection between ideas. Both of the bridges in this album that we've listened to so far introduce new melodic ideas. And both times, as soon as I feel like we have laid down the foundation to explore something really cool, to expand on what we've done and or incorporate it into the style that we've had previously, they choose to do neither of those and just run right back to a previous idea. I think in the first track we went back to the chorus, and in the second track we went back to the first verse. I would have loved to hear some of these expanded ideas. For track 2, it was the violin duet. I don't remember what it was in track 1. I think it was the dulcimer sounding sound. And some harmony it was doing, I think, and we heard it for like 4 bars, and then they completely ditched that idea. Like they weren't happy with it and wanted to go back to a tried and true thing, so they jumped back to a chorus. Like it's just a really weird idea to me, and I thought it would have been cool to sort of pocket that under the chorus. Same thing with Wormwood. We had a new harmonic device in this bridge. We had the violin duet. We had the concept of one violin sort of shifting, panning, while the other one was static center. And sometimes they would play the exact same thing with a little bit of delay on the second. So it kind of sounded like a bit of an echo or a reverb. And then other times they were doing counterpoint. It's just like a really beautiful idea. And we heard it for like 10 seconds and then they ditched it. I would have loved to have heard that continue on underneath where we went next. And it always feels like these sections are lost threads, something that they forgot they put in the song and meant to pull out because it feels so different from everything else and ends up feeling very disconnected because it never gets integrated into the song proper. I really hope this isn't something they're going to continue to do, a pattern that ends up us hearing multiple times on this album, because it's already sort of annoying me. But I think part of that is the differences between what I like to listen to and their intentions with the music. I've already mentioned I like to hear callbacks and motifs and classical composition devices in music like this, where we have this expanded palette of sound, of instruments. I like the music to match that. And that's not necessarily what they're aiming for. They just want this strong bit of atmosphere. And when they do dive into something a bit more melodically engaging to me, I want to retain that. And I want to incorporate it into the music in a type of motif, that we hear something previously in one context and bring it back later in another. And they're just not interested in that. They want to return back to the atmosphere. And I want that strong melodic writing. And so we just got a little bit of conflict here. It does make me wonder why I add it at all. It is 100% so far that I enjoy where the bridges are going. They just never go as far as I would like them to. And like I said, it makes me wonder why add those moments in at all, especially if they're going to be gone as so quickly. It really feels like I just got to know this sound and y'all are already moving away from it. So I think that's my biggest negative. It might be my only negative so far, now that I understand what the songs are doing and coming at it from that atmospheric perspective. But it is a blow to my heart. It really is. And like I said, I hope it isn't a pattern we continue to see. Let me find some lyrics for Wormwood and we'll continue on. Alright. This song's interesting. It seems to have a lot of tongue-in-cheek references to Christianity, specifically God and Christ, and the way that their influence is felt on the earth. In this song, though, a lot of it is a bit more of a negative perspection. It says, I can see the shape of God drowning in a pool of blood. A mighty choir of ancient generations sing. Something akin to a chorus. If we only see it once, but it does feel kind of chorusy, and it shows up twice back to back. It says, behold, the hand of death squeezing out earth's final breath. The stars are falling from the sky, and I know why. See God and his hand of death squeezing out earth's final breath. Taking what we thought would have possibly been, from a different perspective, the earth dying because of sin. Here we see the earth dying because of God. And it is a capital G Christian God, just in case anyone was curious. And that's pretty much what the song is about. That stanza right there just completely encapsulates everything. Later on, though, if you haven't figured it out, says it quite bluntly. Behold, your nightmares are fulfilled. God just got his final will. The world stops spinning and death is all around. There is quite a bit of Latin in here. I believe this is sung by the choir. In the middle of this Latin chant, which says, 2 nights ago, the guns of the League. 2 nights ago, a row of 8 oars. I have no idea how any of that fits into this song. There is 2 lines in English. Come, join this toast. God is dead. And that's it. Most of the stanzas are about the world ending and either cheekily alluding to it being God or just straight out saying, hey, if you ain't figured it out, God has squeezed the life out of this planet. And it gets a little tiresome. It kind of goes on and on and on. The lyrics are very two-dimensional on this one, which is interesting given a bit of the variety that we heard in the music. So that's it's an interesting little inversion there. I did look real quick. We have checked out Tristania on 3 different live streams. The most recent one was back in May of this year. We checked out track 7, Hatred Grows, from this album. Honestly, I don't remember that. Maybe listening to the music when we get to track 7 is going to, jog my memory a little bit. But I can't even picture, other than being atmospheric, doomy, symphonic-y kind of stuff, right? Interestingly, Hatred Grows is also the least played song on this album as far as Spotify plays go. So that's interesting. I got a real deep cut for that live stream request. All right, we're going to move on to Tender Trip on Earth and see what they're doing with the shortest song on the album at just over 5 minutes long. Interesting shift there.
Up from the gallery, God shouting down at me, something I cannot hear. Tears falling from the sky.
Yeah, keeping pretty much the same writing from the last segment. Just changing the instrumentation, bringing the electric guitar in on top of the acoustic. Bringing the female vocals on top of the male. We have the chord shaping on the guitar in the back. Some synth drone in the background. Gone now. Bringing back the intro. It's interesting to find out that the two guitar notes here are the same as the beginning chord in the first in the acoustic guitar work. So actually, the harmonic information hasn't changed at all between the verse, the chorus, this intro sound, none of it. Using two chords to drive energy, tension, release, tension, release. A lot of layering on this track, and texture layering primarily. In my head, I'm just thinking, don't comment on the fade out. Don't comment on the fade outs. Oh, that's going into the next one. I want to talk about this real quick. I don't have a lot to say, but I do want to bring some stuff up. This is a ballad. I think it's interesting looking at the energy of the album. We kick it off with a lot of forward momentum on the drums, while the rest of the instruments primarily give us this more laid-back atmospheric approach. The drums are driving with a ton of momentum. Wormwood ends up copying a lot of the instrumental vibes, but reducing the energy of the drums, kind of focusing more on that doomier aesthetic. And here we've gone in, pulling the energy even further back in the timbre component of it, bringing in more acoustic instrumentation, getting rid of the growls mostly. I think there's still a little bit of growls in the opening that we return to one others, but a lot of this is clean vocals, more so I think than any of the other tracks so far. Generally, though, the energy of this song is just quite a bit lower, and it's more focused on harmony and texture layering more so than energy and grit and any of that metallic angst that we would get from the electric guitar tone or heavier drumming. And so the album so far has started high as far as intensity is concerned and has been gradually dipping since. I think that's an interesting way to go about it, and I wonder if we'll probably have a mid album peak before doing another descent and then ending the album on a rather high note as far as intensity is concerned. Though I'm not sure that the final peak of the song, the climax of the album, I should say, will be high in intensity as far as energy. I think it'll be high in intensity from an emotional standpoint. That's my guess. Anyways, I'm expecting either track 4 or 5 to be a return to that driving energy, and then again, we're gonna kind of dwindle it back a little bit, maybe have a small peak around track 7, and then track 9, we will have an emotional climax to the album. That's my guess. We'll see how that pans out. That's how I would do it, though, based on what they've done so far and what I think that they excel at as far as writing is concerned. That would be how I end up balancing the flow of the album. Whether the songs actually want to go in that direction, that's a totally different thing. We've had this conversation so many times. Track order is a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to solidify, and there's no right way to do it either. So I'm just going to leave that there. Now, something I picked up on this song is it's a bit busier with its layers. There's a lot of texture layering going on in this track. We do have some harmonic layering too, such as the male and female vocals being like an octave away from each other. But there's quite a few places where we will hear a line. Maybe it's a chord progression, maybe it's a melody, and then another instrument will come in on the same note in the same octave and play the same thing just with a different flavor. It'll have a different texture to it, or a different sound or color. And the song ends up feeling very dense because of that. It does something that I don't think we see on the other two tracks, which is using layers for density, for impact, more so than for complexity. In The Shining Path and Wormwood, most of the new ideas, well, most of the times we hear a new instrument, it brings a new idea with it. It recontextualizes, it expands upon something, it adds to the section in a way that increases the amount of things happening at one time. Whereas in Tender Trip on Earth, we see the opposite of that. Every addition keeps it simple. When we hear a new instrument, it isn't a new melody, it isn't a new ornamental idea, it isn't a new anything. It's something we've already heard from a slightly different perspective. And so we can kind of group it in with that other thing that we've heard. And now that's still one idea, it's just a variation on that one idea that we've heard. And it keeps the song feeling simple, as there's very rarely ever more than 3 or 4 ideas going on at one time, which is different from the 7 to 8 ideas that we have in other tracks so far in the album. I don't think either way is better than the other. That's not a great... I don't think the band does either format better, and I think it's interesting to listen to this album as they might shift between these two. I think this works for a song called Tender Trip on Earth. It keeps things simple and focused on a smaller idea, singularity. You can't really think of a tender moment as something that embodies an entire culture or country or a global idea. That's not tender, at least not to me. Tender tends to be something smaller. A tender moment is between two people. Maybe 3 or 4, a small group. 8 people might have a tender moment together. Nice group hug at the end. But the minute you start bringing in 100 people, I think tender's the wrong word for it. Tender to me indicates a little bit of scope, I guess would be the word for it. And I like how the song aims to keep a small scope as well. Not only does it work with this idea of having this lighter, almost somber feeling to the song rather than heavy weightiness, and having less layers is going to reduce the weight of it. I think it works really well in that regard, but it's also nice contrast for the album. We've already listened to 13 minutes almost of this layered up style of compositional approach. Here we get to lighten the load a little bit. It wouldn't surprise me if Lost also goes in this direction, but like I said, I do think Lost or Deadlocked, one of the next two tracks, is going to bring that energy back up. Regardless, I think it's working really well for the flow, and we've had a little bit of change throughout these tracks. This is a major leap from where we've been, a completely different writing style, and I think it ends up working very well for them. Now, the cover art it's blue. It's a lot of blue and black. It's a cold kind of color focus. Let me pull this up so you can see what I'm talking about here. The music kind of feels that way. I don't know what particularly it is. It might just be the somber element in a lot of the songs, but aside from track 1, which has a little bit more energy and feels a bit more vibrant, a little warmer, we don't really have warm tones in here. Even the vocals being more operatic feel a bit more cold and piercing than something that might be like a very warm, resonant, round tone, something very homely like that. And so part of it I do think is the instrumentation, but then we also have the gritty guitars. They feel a bit warmer to me, but there's a buzzsaw element that kind of pierces through and feels a bit colder than I would describe. So I'm not really sure. It's a little bit of everything. Maybe there is a balance to it, and just leaning more towards a colder production is what makes that emphasized in me as a listener. I don't know. Maybe I am just being influenced by the album art, but yeah, I do think there's something very, very cold, very blue about this album. So far, at least. And Tender Trip on Earth is the most somber, bluish song we've had so far. Which I think is interesting too, because we had the acoustic guitar in there. And I think that could have had a little bit more reverb. It could have ended up feeling warmer. And there probably was a production thing. Maybe it was a specific choice of body and string and material to make it feel a bit colder. I mean, maybe that was also the thing too, just a hyper focus on timbre here. I'm trying to make sure that all the instruments, well, actually, the warmth of it's like a semi-warmth, because like you still feel the string reverberance. You don't really get that with the electric guitars. The distortion and amplification sort of override a lot of that natural coloring of the instrument. But electric guitars also aren't made out of, don't have a wooden body that the sound waves bounce around within before coming out too. So some of that coloring is missing in an electric guitar. But anyways, there is a little bit of warmth to it, and I think that works well at delivering a feeling of tenderness. The other two tracks, being primarily electric guitar driven, have a heavier, weightier sound to them. It feels a bit more distant and apathetic in a sense, whereas Tender Trip on Earth, bringing in a larger focus on the acoustic guitar, brings in something a little bit more human and grounded to the album that we hadn't heard previously either. Yeah, I think this is a nice little checkpoint. It is perfectly at 33% through the song. We're a third of the way through track-wise. Anyways, although time-wise, we might also be a third of the way through. I mean, most of these tracks are very similarly lengthed, so it's not like we're doing a bunch of 5-minute songs and then the back half is all 10s or something like that. And I think this is a really good checkpoint for the album. To have this little group here and kind of view it as not necessarily a trilogy, but I do think that the general flow and energy of these three songs work really well together. And if you needed to take a break from the album for whatever reason, I mean, it's only been like 16 minutes, but this would be a good stopping point. Other than the fact that going into Lost. I forgot about that. The electric guitar crescendo there going on. But yeah, let me read some lyrics to Tender Trip and then we'll move on. Alright, here we have a song about two people. Neither of them seem to be in really great places personally, but they're happy to be forgetting all of their grief and loss and pain while they are together. The beginning says, another day, the next page, still in a daze, still in a dream. Out of the pipe, my lust for life comes and goes, and from above demanding purity and sobriety, cursing me like a sledge hammering down at me. It's an interesting use of, instead of cursing me like a sledgehammer, we have cursing me like a sledge hammering down at me, sort of using the beginning of hammering to piece together the idea of a sledgehammer and the feeling of these curses. And basically, it says, my lust for life comes and goes. This person obviously has suicidal thoughts or tendencies. They are disillusioned with life at times. They don't necessarily have a want for it. And that they have these demands. It says from above. Going back with our previous track, it may be a religious demand, though it might just be from older family, the elders in their life, demanding their purity and their sobriety and cursing the choices that they're making. So this person just doesn't have a really strong support structure, it seems, for dealing with the negativity of their life. Let's see, where is it though? Where's this stanza? Oh, it says, you can be a sunbeam and shine for a while. You can laugh a lot and bring out that smile. For now, we are hanging in. I don't know if that's supposed to be like a metaphorical hanging in, or maybe it's just a different way of saying hanging out. Regardless, they are with each other. It says, even though we're blessed with sin, you make my tired heart sing. Then we have what I think is a perspective from the male character here. It says, I'm on a tender trip and slowly I'm losing grip. There's madness in the air, but still you're my acid queen and you stay on my faded team. Run through the corridors with me. They both sing tears falling from the sky, words from a lullaby. Everything beautiful dies, but for now we're hanging in. Though we are blessed with sin, you make my tired heart sing. And they repeat that over and over at the end of the song. So like I said, both of these people are not in great places. They have pressures and weight. They're dealing with demons, and they forget all of it when they're with each other for a little bit of time, and that makes both of them happy. They're trying to find whatever happiness they can in such a dreary life. I think this does kind of work with the song. It is sad. It is somber. It's heavy at places, but there's also a warmth to it, like I said, that we don't really get on the other two tracks. And it's this human connection, I think, that's poking through in the music with the use of that acoustic guitar. And also the heavy use of the clean vocals and the harmonized clean vocals that I think this is the first time we've heard them. I don't think we've had the clean male vocals at all on this album, so yeah, it ends up working out really well and tying the whole song together. Real quick, before we jump into the next song, I noticed at the bottom of Genius it mentioned this was Gothic metal. And it kind of dawned on me, yeah, that's probably more accurate than Doom. Genius is a terrible source for finding genre. There's too many metal songs that are listed under the pop tag. That's probably some sort of default that every song gets put under and people just don't change it. It's not a place I usually go for when I'm looking for good, accurate genre information. However, like I said, Gothic metal seems to fit here. So I went and looked it up. And it says emerged in the early 90s, Gothic metal bands drew influence from doom metal, blending the crushing heaviness of doom with ethereal, moody textures. Vocally, the genre is notable for its contrast, with many bands employing operatic female vocals juxtaposed with deep growling male vocals taken from death and doom bands. Yeah, that's what we're listening to. So we haven't done a lot of gothic metal on the channel, and when we have, I've confused it for doom, just like I did this time. Maybe we need have we ever done a whole week of gothic? I don't think we have. We've done isolated tracks. Maybe we just need a whole week of it for me to really solidify that sound, because when I read it, I'm like, yeah, of course, gothic metal. Heaviness of doom, ethereal textures, that feels very gothic to me. It's just, I don't ever think about it. The term is just not locked inside my mind. It's not a phrase I think about. So I wasn't wrong calling it doom, but I was also wrong calling it doom. And I'm sure some of you have already corrected me on that. I think that's fantastic. I really don't mind. The more comments, the better, for all like the algorithm garbage. But I also think it's good practice to take your notes while you're watching this, because I don't expect you to watch a most likely 3.5 hour video and then remember everything for the end. That's ridiculous. Definitely comment as you go if you want. And if I figure things out later on in the video, whatever, just edit your comment. Oh, you figured this out later. Still, I'd like to leave it. Like, whatever. I don't care, man. There's no rules to YouTube. Don't let them tell you how you can comment. We're going to push forward to track 4. I don't know who the they are, but if you feel like anyone else is dictating how you comment on YouTube or any social media, don't let them. Do what you want. It's the internet, man. All right, that was a weird tangent. Lost, Tristania. Let's, maybe I'll back this up a little bit, because I know there was like a guitar thingy happening. Technical term, by the way, guitar thingy is happening. Ooh, we got a phaser sounds. That's not what I would expect. This is higher energy. Oh, the syncopated rhythm too. Oh, early? There we go. I was expecting one more chiller song after Tender, but yeah, that fun syncopated walk down on the guitar. Really widening out the sound here. Going back to that one note. They love to do that. So many guitar sections are based on just one or two notes. Yeah, dude, that is funky. think it's supposed to be eerie and unsettling with the harmonic component of these two synths, but it comes off as very fun to me with the bouncing back and forth, the semi-hocket thing going on. The driving energy, like, it's kind of haunting harmonically, but it's a very playful sound too. It's like bringing the choir back. Yeah, that section though, it's like less House on Haunted Hill and more Casper the Friendly Ghost. I don't know if that's what they were aiming for. The highly compressed kind of hip-hop style in the drums, this is an interesting choice. We have an expanded harmonic palette here. The violin's definitely not working within traditional metal chords. I would have just liked a little expansion of that, that's all. It's such a short-lived idea too, as like an 8-bar bridge at a fast tempo. These gothy electronic components. This is a very different direction than I expected. That's a good use of that violin. The expanded harmonic palette, the violin solo working within the metallic component. Yeah. I'm still not sure how to feel about this song yet, though. It's definitely the black sheep of the album so far. I talked about the first three songs working really well together, having similar emotional components, similar atmospheres, just kind of having a reduced energy across them and creating this interesting downward flow, almost as if the album is losing energy over the course of the runtime. I expected an adrenaline kick somewhere in here to bring the intensity back up. I was not expecting something that feels like it was highly influenced by industrial electronic music and trying to incorporate that into their doomier aesthetic. I don't even know that it necessarily works. It comes off as more... I don't know. It's comical to me. I think many of the industrial components are added in such a way that they're so stereotypical, it kind of feels like parody to me. It's almost too overdone. And the way that it's added alongside the metallic elements never really quite, I don't know, works well. And it just ends up feeling a little underbaked to me. At most of the time, and almost a tongue-in-cheek parody in some other times. That's a bit of a rare feeling about this song, though. I do think, though, if we remove the electric guitar, Actually, we could probably even keep the electric guitar in most places. It has a unique timbre here. They use a different guitar tone in this track than the other three. Um, Kind of brightens it up a little bit, I think, to keep it the higher energy of everything else. The darker tone they've been using, I think, would have dragged it down too much. Um, but if we replace the driving, obviously metal coated drum work and just give it a nice electronic beat, maybe four on the floor, alternating snare and bass, possibly. Give it a bit more crunch, maybe more of an electronic drum kit sound. I mean, I used to visit this goth nightclub kind of often when I was younger, and I could easily see something like this with a more traditional electronic drum beat there to dance to with the harsh vocals and all. Like everything else fits it really well, and that's, I think, is kind of why I see it as semi parody in some places. They probably were earnest about creating something a bit more electronic here, but it just doesn't feel that way, possibly in retrospect, because it just feels so stereotypically, you know, goth industrial electronic music in a way that I don't think adds anything to that side of the genre and doesn't really revolutionize the metal side that they're incorporating into it either. And so we end up getting this semi dancey sound in the middle of an album that is very emotionally wrought. It's melodramatic in so many different ways, whether that's atmosphere or lyrics. And then we get this fun dancey one. I just like can't stop moving my head to and my body, and like you just gotta get into it. It's driving. It's energetic. It's not really heavy like any of the other songs. It just kind of comes out of nowhere, and like that absurdity is also a little jarring as well. I don't know. It's an interesting song. I think in a different context, it probably works really well. After these first three songs, it feels strange though. Um, so yeah, that's my subjective take on this. More objectively, though, I think this is a song that works well generally. Like on paper, when we look at how the notes are played, rhythmic ideas, the way things are layered, I think everything works great. We have more driving guitar work in here. We actually get to hear some riffage from them. There's these cool walking down ideas that we heard from the guitars. On the rhythmic side of things, whether it is the guitars, the bass, or the drums, there's a lot of syncopation in here. There's a lot of play around downbeat accents. The drums really emphasize these core beats. Most of the instruments, whether it is a synth or the bass or the guitar, sometimes even the vocals, they will play around with offbeat accents to juxtapose the downbeat focus that the drums give us. And it ends up feeling very bouncy, very dancey, very light. This is all juxtaposed with the heaviness, weight, and darkness of the general sounds of the instruments. I did say that the guitars are brightened up just a little bit, but we do have the synth that brings a bit of a darker tone that we haven't heard really. I feel like the synthesizer has used more acoustic sounding instrument libraries up until this point, and this was one of the first times we really heard some electronic sounds coming from the synthesizer. They have a bit more width to them, a bit more meat, more fuzz, more compression. And so it is an overall, I think, generally darker sound on the surface level. The other songs have been darker atmospherically. This song is dark timbre wise. I think that's part of what also kind of feels like parody to me, is that they've done a really great job at creating nuanced, deep darkness. Of creating things that feel somber and heavy, not because anything is in your face, but because of all the subtle nuances that come together to create a specific atmosphere and emotion. Whereas when it comes to this song, it's like, hey, don't you hear this gritty guitar? Hear how dark my heart is in the bass kick. And it just feels so like performative goth. And again, I don't think that that was their intention. I think that they were earnest in their attempt here. I'm just not too sure that the way I read it, with 20 years difference between when the song came out and when I'm listening to it now, it feels more playful than I think it should, than I think it's aiming for. And part of that also just might be me, my relationship to these sounds as well. But yeah, I mean that's generally how I feel about it. But we do have these darker tones in this song, and like I said, in a different context, I think it works well. It's quite jarring coming from Tender Trip on Earth though, which feels very earnest and heartfelt. Then we get this. I think other than just the juxtaposition of where we've been to here, another jarring aspect is the choir. Something that I think has worked really well at elevating these songs and making something that is really, when you read the lyrics, quite melodramatic and trying to create some serious drama out of it, or at least the feeling of serious drama. It like I said, it helps kind of justify the heightened words and language and kind of reduces some of the camp. The choir here does the opposite. To me, it feels really out of place. It doesn't heighten anything, and to me, it actually kind of cheapens things. But part of this might also just be due to the way that I'm already relating to the song. The choir does do one thing that I enjoy, though, and that's add vocal melodies to the song. And we really don't have too many of the female vocals on this one. A lot of it is the male vocalist. We have a lot of growling on this track. It's a lot of texture work, which I think gets balanced out rather nicely as the guitars do take up a little bit more melodic writing. I would love to hear more of this guitar melodic writing in other places, but at the same time, I wouldn't say that the melodies here are necessarily strong. We have some awesome Rule of Cool riffs in here that I think are kind of memorable just based off of how cool they sound, but I don't think any of them are going to get stuck in my head because they are an infectious melody. We still haven't taken the guitars to that melodic range yet. And that's perfectly fine. We have the choir, we have the synth, we have the clean vocalist. We have plenty of places to get melody into the song from that we don't need to put all that weight on the guitars to do that also. In fact, in this song, we had the violin pick up two different solo sections, more places for melody to come from other than the guitar. But since it is such a guitar-focused song, I was kind of hoping that the guitar riffs would be a little bit more exploratory with pitch, and we still ended up just getting a lot of riffs based around one or two notes. I don't know if I'm going to continue to point that out, probably because I do think it's interesting to find patterns like that. But it's not, I don't want it to be seen as a way that I'm kind of bashing on the album because, oh, look, the guitarist only plays 2 notes per song or something like that. It's more of a showcasing of how you can create music with different types of composition, where some bands are going to rely on intricate or interesting guitar riffs, and other bands can sort of simplify the guitar riffs down because the weight of being interesting or catchy or whatever is put on a different instrument. This is definitely one where the guitars can be a bit more simple because the band picks up a lot of slack and works together to elevate the atmosphere, which is way more important than any individual performer or instrument musician on this album so far. And the last thing I want to note, this song kind of ruined it a little bit. But ignoring this one, the 3 tracks we've listened to so far are all generally palatable. You know, they have the harsh vocals in them, and that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I think when you look at the atmosphere of the song, the aesthetic or vibe that they're creating, the plethora of clean vocals in choir, and the generally simplified harmonic palette here, I think you'll find an album that, at least for metalheads, isn't going to be too extreme for a majority of them. And that ends up creating a lot of accessibility for something that is doing some new stuff. Maybe not new in the grand scheme of things, but like I mentioned, we are taking doom metal, the feelings of it, the atmosphere of it, the emphasis on atmosphere and emotion over all else, and adding layers to it, exploring the harmonic palette, widening that out a little past metal pentatonic stuff, and exploring a little bit of classical and theatrical components into the music. So maybe people came to this album because of the clean vocals and they got into metal through that. They weren't a big fan of the meaty guitars and the growling, but They really liked the clean vocals. Maybe there were metalheads who listened to this and were like, oh, I kind of dig this. The operatic vocals, they kind of work. The choir is neat, and maybe they found symphonic metal, or maybe they started exploring musical theater or opera because of this. And I think it ends up being a really great bridge album. Lost aside, it takes things in a very different direction. It's hard to speak about this whole album with Lost in it, at least so far. I think Lost is going to have a bridge to a very different group of audience, so it might be a bridge song in that capacity as well. But I do think that the general palatability, ease of listening to this, as long as you are accustomed to harsh vocals, all of that kind of brings it together into an album that can touch a very wide audience, cast a very wide net, and it does all of these things really well. If you like atmosphere, nails it. If you like theatrics and melodrama, yeah, it's got that in spades. Do you like really strong classical vocal work? Yeah, this vocalist just beautiful, amazing vocal work. Everything they do to such a high level. And then there's Lost. I'm kidding. No, everything they do to such a high level that I think it's easy to bring in somebody who might only like one aspect of it and help them ease into an aspect they're less familiar with. All right, let me read some lyrics to this, and we'll push on to the back half of the album. All right, I really was hoping to not have to say this. The lyrics are just as vapid as the song kind of felt like to me. I didn't really use those words plainly like that, describing the music, but I think I kind of said it between the lines. The music has a lot of depth to it. I don't want to discredit it for that, but the general dance vibe of it kind of doesn't fit anything else. The lyrics kind of feel like that too. They're very surface level, and I think here, like the melodrama, instead of being flattened out a little bit and reduced by some musical ideas, they kind of feel elevated. And so the campiness is on full display here. This feels like a poem that I might have written when I was like 15. It says hard. I'm harder than the life I've lived. Strong. I'm stronger than the pain you give. The world you're in is so lost. The life you live, I see the lies, the dark side of the smiles you give. Yeah, just says I'm better than you. My life has been hard. You give me nothing but pain, but I'm better than both of those. You just live in a world of lies. I see through it, you sheep. Why can't you see it? Emo Bryan's coming out. I can already feel it. He's working his way, and I gotta watch my back too, cause like Halloween is upon us, and that dude always tries to take the channel over. Second verse says, old. I'm older than the years I've lived, and cold. I'm colder than the smile you give. This is the second time we've talked about that, with the first verse saying that there's a dark side of the smiles you give. Now he's saying that your smiles are cold. Not only are they heartless, but they're also deceptive. Which, I mean, they kind of go hand in hand, right? He says, my life has been the dreams you say I'm living in. How long will you be lost, and when will you give in? The rest of the song, both the bridge and the chorus and the outro, are all, I am the one, I'm anyone you like me to be, and I'm gone whenever you would like to be free. And I don't know what that means. I guess it really depends on who the you is. I kind of took the you to be an antagonist, but the chorus doesn't really feel that way. I'm anyone you want me to be, and I'm gone whenever you want me to go. I don't see how that works. And that's it. A lot of these songs have been really lengthy poems with many ideas, multiple stanzas per verse. There has been a lot of repetition, especially at the end of songs, repeating chorus after chorus after chorus, but even bridges, we would see multi-stanza bridges. And here, we have like, I don't know, 13 unique lines and a lot of repetition. And it's very surface level. I mean, the other ones have been surface level too, but I feel like they've been about something. This is just very generic, very bland. It's very dance music. And you heard me chuckle. Now, part of that is a nervous chuckle because I'm kind of speaking bad about a song. And I don't like doing that, especially when there's fans. I know that people are going to flame me in the comments, whatever. But part of it is that it's kind of comedic to me how teenage, angsty, my soul is so black this is. And I see some of myself in that, my older self, my younger self, me who I was years ago. It's convoluted. And I don't know. I really don't think the rest of the album has been that much deeper lyrically, but I think I can clearly see that this song was written by a different lyricist. The others might have been collaborations, maybe it was just one lyricist, I don't know. This one feels like it was written by somebody totally different though. I don't know if there's any documentation for that. I would be surprised if there was, because I don't think most songs well, actually, Genius sometimes does. Not today. We have a writer and a vocals. So, I don't know. It could also just be that the song didn't click with me. And I had already talked about the song being a bit campier. The lyrics end up being a bit campier for me too. I don't know. It feels like it's an interesting exploration. I don't know if Tristania had tried to incorporate more electronic, especially this goth industrial sound into their music previously, or if this was a first attempt. I don't think it's bad, but usually when you mix genres, you're either wanting to explore something wild, that's where you get your avant-garde stuff, or you're wanting to elevate the styles by merging them together. Maybe you have two styles that are both dark and dreary, and you want to amplify that dreariness through the both of them. Driving, high-intensity dance music, I don't think really works well with gothic, low-intensity, high-emotion and atmosphere music, and trying to pair them together ended up working and creating this driving, dancey track. I don't think that the experiment was a failure. It just doesn't really belong with the rest of the songs on this album. Like I said, in another context, this probably works really well. It just feels weird here after so many tracks that are melodramatic, over the top, sure, but feel rooted somehow, for this to get rid of that and just kind of jump the shark in a musical way. It's weird. I hope the rest of the album doesn't follow in on this. And speaking of the rest of the album, we are going to move on to Deadlocked, their most popular song on the album, and the only one to pass 1 million plays. After this one, I'm going to do a little bit of research. I'll read their Genius page, both for the album and the artist. I'll check out their Wikipedia. I might go look at Metal Archive. Does Metal Archives have information, or is it more like metadata? I don't really remember them having like a paragraph bio or information or anything like that. I just want to get a little bit of extra information about this. I think I have a pretty good grasp of what the band is doing for this album. This is their most popular song, so by here I should definitely have a strong understanding of it. And just to get a little bit of extra information to supplement what I'm pulling from the album itself. And then we'll move on to our final 4 tracks after that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just dive into Deadlocked. Cool use of volume dynamics. I like the split panning. Also very different textures, timbres on these 4 instruments so far. It's creating a very nice palette. Very expressive and dynamic. The way all of these lines are interplaying around each other, the melody on the piano. Yeah, this is a beautiful introduction. I hope it doesn't get left on the wayside and somehow we incorporate the song around it. Okay, okay. We have the same chord progression, some of the same rhythmic information. Yeah, okay. Same atmosphere and feeling. The violin solo is gorgeous here. Yeah, I was scared. Every time we have a cool moment, we tend to discard it to get back to a metallic sounds. But here we incorporated a lot of the feeling and characteristics of it and found slight modulations to that opening idea to craft it into something that would feel right with, guitars, strumming acoustic guitars and stuff like that. We have a moving bass line too, a little bit of walking ideas. Some brass? No, there's no brass. I don't know what I heard. The layered, heavy whisper, compressed growling sound, that was interesting. A very wavy synth sound panning from left to right. It's very distracting. It's interesting too, when I listen to the instruments here, this is a lot warmer than some of the other songs. We have 3 vocal lines here. It's a really large harmony stack, but it's not the choir. Oh, it's the synth. Yeah, it was. I think there were still 2 vocal tracks there. But we did have the synth under it supporting it. Alright. It's an interesting song because it's very mellow. It reminds me of Tender Trip on Earth a lot. But it retains the heavy layering that we had from something like The Shining Path and merges the two together into a very nice midpoint, where there certainly is a lot of purely atmospheric, simple ideas here, but there's a plethora of ornamental and tertiary lines being written that pop up here and there to add on to the depth and technicality of the overall composition on this one. And I like that. We also didn't have any harshes in here, which kind of a bonus for me. I did kind of miss it though. I think the harshes provide a nice contrast. I just wish they had contrast within themselves. That is to say that I enjoy the timbre of the harsh vocal. I just wish that it wasn't so monotonous. I would really like a vocalist with a little bit more range to play counter to the clean vocals. Alright, before we get into all of this, I do want to touch on something that's kind of been annoying me a little this album, and this was the worst track for it so far. The synthesizer dude needs to let up a little bit. Generally, I like what they're bringing to the table with the synth. The different timbres that are used, the way that we can add extra flavor or color to a passage with a plethora of different sounds at their disposal. And generally, I'd say it's a benefit. Even on this song, having those synth elements, I think, help fill out an idea, create like counterpoint, add harmony to. It's always a great addition to what's happening. That part I don't have a problem with. It is 100% the effects. Sometimes they're fine because they kind of come through in an invisible kind of way. But with this song, they frequently aren't. They are very distracting. There is that one sound, it was very wavy, and it was panning from side to side, and it was kind of present. I wasn't really fond of that. It was just playing chords too, which we were already getting that information from the guitars. And it was more of a piercing sound as well. It felt like a strange choice of sound to do this on. It's almost like it was getting drowned out by what the guitars were doing, since they were both filling out the same role and they wanted to stand out a little bit more in the mix, so they just tacked on a bunch of effects and never really worked for me. I think they might have been going for possibly more of a dreamlike feeling on it, or something a bit more ethereal. Maybe even the waviness plus the piercing tone kind of wanted something a bit shimmery or shining. Maybe like a musical representation of a chandelier or something. It kind of leans sort of like I could see that, but the execution was just way too gaudy. And just reining that in a little bit, I think, would have helped a lot. And the more I think about it, this song had a ton of reverb. It had a ton of delay on it. We had those super stacked vocals at the end that sort of sounded choir-like, but wasn't really a choir. It was just one vocalist doing what I thought was possibly three different harmonies. And come to find out, it's only two different lines with a very sharp synth underneath it. That was kind of tucked in there nicely. I will say that was a great way of disguising the synth under it, but it also changes the vocal stack to feel a little bit more electronic in a way that I don't think they were necessarily going for. Kind of removing the human component in that final 20 seconds or so of the vocals. And just between all these effects, I feel like this song ends kind of poorly. It starts really strong, and maybe this was also the purpose too. It's called Deadlocked. I'm trying to like figure out how that works into this, but it starts out hyper acoustic. Then we bring in the electric guitars, make it more metal, and then the synth comes in, and the song drastically veers away from that human, warm acoustic beginning into something a bit more electronic and cold. Maybe that's by design. I ended up not really liking that transformation, and a lot of it is because of all of the synth effects in play. And it's not just on the synthesizer either. Some of these effects get put on the instruments, like the vocals too. The violin gets kind of reverbery at one point in time, and it's not a tasteful amount of reverb. It's like way overdone. Like probably pulled that dial in quite a bit. And the more I think about it, I've kind of been complaining a little bit about the synths on a lot of this album. They just generally don't work for me. I like the additions on paper. Sometimes they work well. They're sort of invisible sometimes. But generally, I don't think a single section has been elevated by a synthesizer sound. Again, on paper, the ideas, the concepts that are being played, I think elevate the music 100%. It's just the sounds of the instruments. And some of this could just be 2001, right? I don't know what kind of hardware they're working with, what kind of software, maybe more importantly, they're working with, what kind of sound libraries they would have had access to. Maybe this was the best they could have made, but the more I think about it, because remember I was talking about how some of this feels dated and I couldn't quite place what, it's the synth. It's the sonic library they're using. It feels old. It lacks dynamics. It lacks modern texture. It lacks width and just any sort of nuance. And I wonder if me having said this, maybe you've listened to this album dozens of times, hundreds of times, and you've never really noticed it. Now that I'm saying it, I really hate doing this. Do you hear the synthesizer now in a way that you don't enjoy? Or do you still just not care? The synth sounds great. Why wouldn't it? I'm kind of curious about that. Maybe I am alone in this. Maybe others agree with me. I don't know. Put those things down in the comments. Let me know what's going on. Because, I make a lot of opinions that I feel like I'm alone on. And sometimes I find out I am alone on them. And that's fine. But, I do get curious about stuff like this. Especially if you grew up with it, though. I think it's one of those things where you can be kind of blind to it because of nostalgia. Maybe you're not and you still really enjoy it, but maybe you were. And now I've said something and I've ruined your album. And like I said, I'm kind of sad about that possibly, but I am kind of curious from like a scientific angle if that happened. Maybe it's still one of your favorite albums, but it's kind of taken down a notch because like, dang, Bryan, you were right about that synth. I don't know. It's not ruining the album for me, but it's not really helping either. And I find that to be a little bit disappointing. Now, I was going to talk about, at this point, sort of what the song is doing generally. I've kind of already touched on that. I love the beginning of this song. It was just gorgeous. We come in with all of these bells and violins and just layering up all these ideas. And it was such a good start. And I was like, oh, geez, this is just going to get tossed aside. And we're going to get into the song proper and we're going to forget we ever did this intro. But we didn't. And I really love that. As I mentioned, we didn't take most of this and convert it one-to-one into the rock setup. But we did take the heart of it, the feeling of it, the atmosphere, the emotion, the chord progression, even parts of the rhythm are all present in the larger rock orchestration of it. And we kind of took away some of the melodic flourishes to make room for the vocals to come in and do their fresh new melody on top of everything. So we kind of took what we had and created something a bit more foundational in it. But it felt right. It was a bit of a harsh transition into it, but generally speaking, when we brought the whole band in and we converted that writing into it, it worked. I liked that. It was great. We slowly incorporated some electric guitars into this. I thought that was fine. We lost a lot of dynamic nuance, though, which is typical with electric guitars. They're very what they are. Uh, but then, like I said, from about the halfway point of the song, basically everywhere we came from was discarded in order to find a more digital, colder future, or electronic, colder future. And the song continued to shift away from these warmer, human rooted sounds and ideas into tons of layering that kind of work together to create this wall of sound more so than a dynamic, complex, multi line idea. And I think it's really easy to look at the beginning of having 4 or 5 instruments all doing their own things, but coming together to create this very cool, like, series of gears that all work together and spin in unison with each other into the end of the song, which was like 2 or 3 ideas with a lot of instruments in each of them with these really big stacks, whether it's creating a very large sound for the chord progression or creating these big harmonic stacks for the melody. It's all about bringing a lot of ideas to do one thing specifically rather than listening to a bunch of ideas work independently and create something cool out of that. And this idea of reducing complexity for this singularity almost, I think, goes along with moving away from human to digital, from warm to cold. I'm really hoping the lyrics go in this direction, because if not, and all the thematic elements are tossed out and they don't help, I'm really not going to like this. At least from that perspective, I could appreciate the thematic and artistic intention behind it. But without it, it's just a song that took something I really loved and developed it into something that I was kind of apathetic towards, especially with the synth dominance there at the end. So, with that said, let me look at some lyrics. See what's going on with Deadlocked. It's still wild. This is their most popular song, and I don't think it's my favorite so far. With Lost being so low in plays, I figured this would be a drastic departure from that, and it is in a lot of ways, but it's also not that doom metal feeling we kicked the album off with that I really thought was going to be their bread and butter, their staple sounds. So that's interesting. They continue to surprise me. We're halfway done with this album, and I don't really know how to pin down a genre on them yet. They're all generally adjacent, but very wide group of ideas. And this song is very bluntly about suicide. And in fact, if we should take the one instance of method as a fact of what the character is contemplating, a specific type of suicide. It says, you've had your last regrets, reached your final depths through the deepest pits, stepped aside for the world to pass you by. You choose to leave the fear. You are stuck in a world of deadlocks. There's a rope around your neck, this world and its evil ways, the pain that I hide, let's make this happen. The chorus says, left with the shame, will somebody out there give me the blame? And that's what most of the end of the song simply states, is left with the shame, give me the blame. And that's it. It's interesting to see the album go in this direction. For Lost and Deadlocked, both do have very simple, on the surface lyrics about them. No nuance, no metaphor, lacking all of the length and depth. I mean, I don't even know if we can necessarily say there's been a lot of lyrical depth, but there has been a lot of lyrics to the songs. And these 2 tracks have chosen to stick with a smaller amount of unique lines and more repetition of core ideas. I'm also trying to figure out how the song musically works with this, the transition from, in a very morbid perspective, moving from warmth to cold could be the life leaving the body. but I'm not too sure that I could read the acoustic to the digital or the electronic in that same lens. But the song is about a transition, regardless, one of life to death. And I think representing that transition in the music is an interesting direction to provide thematic cohesion between the two. It is the first time I think there's been any strong sense of cohesion between the musical themes and lyrical ones, so maybe it is more of a coincidence this time around. But it is one that I think kind of works, and like I said, even on a bit of a morbid figurative level, it lines up rather well too. And that takes us to Selling Out, track number 6. Let's dive into this, see what's going on as they take us into the back half of this album. Kind of retreading that digital electronic sound of Lost. Less dancey though, and more just like a subtle groove. I like the bass presence on this. It's sort of a blown out sound where I can't hear distinction in it, but I can hear the tone of it more clearly than in any other song. This is interesting. It actually feels more like Gothic rock. Not really going with the heavy weight of the doom metal component and just focusing on that Gothic side of things. Lovely dynamic work on this. Different attacks, volumes. There's a lot of space between the vocal bits. We could have easily had some call and response on the violin with this. Bit of a moving guitar line over here. That's a nice change of pace. Says an overdose of nothingness. The bass and guitar together on this low end sound works really well. You get the wide resonance of the bass with the grit of the guitar. Very cool combination. the synth in the background just kind of howling with these ornamental ideas actually works really well. Very harsh transition into this. So we're not going to get another violin solo then, because just prior to those vocals would have been where it would have been seated. It's interesting too because the constant bass kicks here presents a little bit of weight that in other bands I don't think it would necessarily connotate, but because it's so sparingly used on this album, it creates a lot of impact there. To hear this chiller, laid-back version of this harmony and melody, it's an interesting way to wrap that song up. Yeah, I think just generally, this is an interesting song. I think it pairs some of the more electronic sounds of Lost with the metal aspects a lot better here. I think partially, though, that's because we're not going for a dance track. We're just bringing in the electronic sounds to create or help them create the atmosphere of this track. Also pulling away from the metallic side and focusing more on a lighter Gothic rock, bringing in the right atmosphere but without the weight of the metallic side, pairs better with the electronic sound that they're working with on this. You can easily mix metal and electronic and create something that works well, that gels between the two of them, but you really need the right style of electronic and the right style of metal. You can pair two things that don't work together, but you're getting into avant-garde territory and you're going to have a lot of work trying to force them together. Standing off edges where you need to so that the puzzle pieces can fit together even though they're from two different puzzle sets. Whereas when you work with two that already have a lot of overlap, if you were to create a Venn diagram of components of these genres, they share a lot of ideas already, it's going to be easier to merge them together. This isn't just a metal and electronic thing, this is pulling two genres together no matter what they are. The more they have in common, the less work it is to make them work together. And I do think that them working with the electronic sounds that they are and trying to emulate the specific electronic subgenres that they are, I don't necessarily know that they work as well with the metallic energy that we had in Lost. It was an interesting mishmash there where I think with a little work they could have cleaned it up a little bit and made it work a lot better, but they ended up not. And so on this track, we kind of pulled away from the dancier side of electronic and from the heavy weight of metal and lightening it up a little bit into the rock sound. And this ends up creating two genres that I do, or two sonic palettes, I think, that do have a bit more overlap, that do work well better. And so we get this track here, Selling Out, which I have some issues with, but I think does the idea of mixing electric guitars and heavy drums with electronic sounds a lot better than Lost did. This one feels more sincere to me, and I can take it at face value. I don't find anything absurd or comical about it. And again, just in case, those are subjective things. My take on Lost is subjective. It's my opinion. But I also think Selling Out does something interesting where we kind of have a motif going on. It's very light and sparsely used, but it does show up in at least two distinct sections across two different instruments, and we do have the uh, low energy rendition of this motif at the end of the song using, I think, the same instruments we had previously, just shifting from an overdriven guitar to an electric guitar, lightening up some of the drum components, removing some hits from some beats just to reduce the amount of attacks. Generally, though, I guess you could see this as a third version of this motif. I would love to see more of this. And once again, I'm asking for more progressive elements in a band that is pretty happy just writing goth metal. This heavy atmospheric doom style of metal with this emphasis on gloomy sounds rather than intense weight of but what would you call doom metal? It's like it's not desperation. It's giving up. I don't know. Doom kind of feels like that to me. Gothic metal is the act of giving up, losing the will. Doom metal is I've already lost the will. I'm past that point. That's sort of how I envision the two styles on a very like large umbrella take for it. Different bands, of course, are going to approach those sounds in different ways, and they can take different emotions out of those. But I think part of it is also just the general dramatic level, where Doom can be over dramatic in its own way, but Gothic metal, from what we've listened to with uh, what is that band? We've checked them out before and just can't think of their name. Oh, My Dying Bride. Yep, that's them. Very melodramatic, very theatric, almost overly done. And this band kind of touches into that realm too, which is kind of what I'm picking up a little bit as a nice separator between Doom and Gothic, which is how much drama is there. How campy does it feel? Does it feel, not to be derogatory, does it feel very teenage gloom or adult gloom? And again, very umbrella looking at that too. Could be some goth metal bands that feel a bit older and mature in their type of gloom, but the little bit that I've heard, again, maybe we need a full week of gothic metal, but the little bit that I've heard, I think every single time it's like, dang, emo me would have loved this 20 years ago. But it doesn't really resonate too much with adult me. The themes just aren't, they don't have that maturity to them. So, yeah, anyways, I don't know how we got on that. I think this song does a much better job than Lost at pairing these together. I don't even know how we got on that tangent. This is another one that kind of features less of the harsh vocals in it. We get a little bit of them, but I am missing the dual vocals. We had a little bit of that at the beginning of the album. Was that track 2? Having the harshes and the cleans combined. Track 3 gave us the the dual cleans. We're just not having any more of that. We had a wonderful violin solo. It was gorgeous. It kind of lost its way in the third quarter. But part of that, I could see that from a storytelling aspect. But it ends up catching its own feet and not stumbling and finishing out strong. And it ends up being a really great melody that also, as usual, expands the harmonic palette a little bit past what the guitars are playing. And It's a really great idea overall. I love that moment. I wish it would have lasted longer. I would have taken twice as long on that solo. But after it, the vocals come in, and there's so much room for the violin to come back and have interplay with that vocal melody. Like I said, the vocals sing, and then there's like 2 to 3 beats of silence. And maybe that silence is necessary. Maybe the song is about feeling lonely and asking questions and getting no response because no one's there. In which case, thumbs up, that's fantastic storytelling in your music. But if not, there is a great case, I think, to be made for the violin to show up more often in whatever that was. I don't know if that was a verse or chorus or whatever. It was the first time through on the cleans, though. And I thought it was a huge missed opportunity not to bring the violin solo back at all before we revisited this section. It felt a bit rushed without that movement between I think it was harsh vocal section into the clean vocals. And again, it was my favorite part of the first time through that flow, and it didn't come back. So I feel like this, I'm just repeating myself a lot here, is that I feel like there's a lot of places for more involvement of classical style composition in here, more progressive writing. It's not what they were aiming for. Maybe they didn't have the chops for it. I don't know. Regardless, they didn't do it in the end, and I shouldn't judge it for what it doesn't do. That's not fair, because then no album is ever good enough, because they could have always done something better, right? But I do find myself enjoying a majority of this album. I don't know if it's something I would revisit, but I am generally liking the sound, the atmosphere of it, the contrast and dynamics in some of these moments. But inevitably, each song has some point in it where I feel a little let down because of something that, at least to me, seems really obvious. And again, that's not fair, because retrospect and 20 years of metal development, would I have thought to do these things if I was still 38 in 2001? I'm not 38 though. Why did I say that number? I'm getting there, but I'm not there. Anyways, but yeah, like if I hadn't heard all the prog metal in the last 23 years, would I still think to do that? Maybe. I mean, there's still my classical background that would have influenced me, but you can't know with stuff like that. Who we are now is because of everything that's happened. It's really difficult to guess how things might have been if your experiences were different. So, maybe this is just an anachronistic thing. I wish they would have I wish they would have made this as if it were 2024. Like, that's not fair either. And I feel like that's what I'm asking sometimes. But it's one of those things too that happens often when I look at older stuff, and it sucks that 2001 I can refer to as older, but I mean, it's 2 decades ago. I don't know who needs to hear that. I don't need to hear that, that's for sure. But 2001 was 2 decades ago, man. But yeah, I mean, the further away I think a song is from modern times, the harder it is for me to really sync up with it because of how tastes develop. I don't think I'll have this problem as much going forward, because I will have had more time as a mature, music enjoying, musically educated adult to explore music. But like I said before, I was just barely into double digits when this came out. I wasn't paying attention to this or the realm of music or anything like that at the time. So this really is, in a sense, before my time, before I got into music in any strong way. And through that lens, I've consistently shown on this channel, I kind of have a tough time getting around to that. I might be able to find an appreciation, but an enjoyment, the things I like really do tend to lean a bit more modern than this. Post 2010 is really where music, especially metal, tends to click with me. Well, I'd say metal and rock start to click with me. I feel like I didn't say much about this specific song, other than the fact that it did the pairing thing like Lost did a lot better. That's really what stands out to me. And the motif. I'm glad I picked that up. That was worth talking about. Otherwise, there's nothing that really stands out to me on this one that we haven't really explored on other tracks. And I mean, it makes sense. We are in the back third of this album now. We only have 3 tracks to go out of 9. Bands that have a style will definitely start to the songs will start to not necessarily bleed together. I think there's enough that make them all stand out in some way, but how they go about writing a song, what kind of techniques they use to provide specific elements of interest or thematic concepts, anything like that, it's going to start to blend together a little bit, as they certainly have a style of music that they make with a rather consistent foundation and blueprint for their songs. That's pretty typical for a lot of bands, and I think it's why my album reviews tend to sort of peter out on details in the last hour, because I just kind of run out of unique things to bring up. So in spite of not saying much about this song, it still does what many of the other songs on the album do well, which is atmosphere and emotion, crafting a song that pulls the listener through it. I really don't think they have problems with pacing. I haven't brought that up too much. It isn't a song that feels perfectly paced. None of the songs feel perfectly paced, but none of them feel like they drag on either. It's sort of an invisible pacing where you don't really think about it. It's not done so well that you have to comment on it, but it's not done so bad you have to comment on it either. It's just, it's well done. Well done in an invisible way. Alright, I don't think I have a single timestamp here other than the one block. That's gonna be a little confusing. But we're gonna head into some lyrics here. See what's going on with Selling Out, and then we're going to revisit Hatred Grows and see if that clicks with me at all. It's been several months since I last heard that, but maybe there's a riff or a melody in there. I'm like, oh yeah, it's this one. I don't understand the concept of selling out in this context, but the song is about having everything positive ripped away from you and being left with nothing, an overwhelming amount of nothing, and as I accurately picked up during the reaction, an overdose of nothingness. There's multiple stanzas about being down on the floor and not being able to get back up, not just being stuck there because of a lack of energy, which, yes, that also keeps this person down, but also fists striking them while they're down, boots kicking them, a darkness leaving them blinded, running out of air to breathe, running out of the ability to make noise, and just feeling, it says, kind of wasted, being alive but stuck down. There are no hands reaching for them, just words that antagonize them. It says that they are called cowards and sinners and thieves. It says they've run out of dreams to dream. They've even run out of tears to spend. Just about being overwhelmingly depressed. That's what that song's about, which is interesting given how energetic it is compared to some of the other songs on the album. Like I said, it kind of merges some of that electronic energy that we saw in Lost better than Lost did. It's not necessarily a dancey song, but it's definitely more energetic than some of the other tracks. And it's interesting to see a song kind of musically have this different energy than lyrically. We have 3 tracks to go. Let's dive into Hatred Grows. See if I can remember this at all. The heavy vibrato operatic vocals on top of the choir, that was kind of nice. It's not a lot of movement on the guitar over here, but I love how it plays with the violin. The violin holds a note. Ba-da-dum. And now the violin. Yeah, dude. The interplay between those two lines is so good. That's interesting. Kind of fun. Very staccato delivery. We have not really seen the female vocalist do that at all. So we have that cymbal over here giving us the beat. They're kind of pushing against it a little bit with the syncopation though. It's interesting too, the guitars gave us the rhythmic push in the previous section with the vocals being legato, and here we have this rhythmic movement in the vocals and the guitars. Well, the guitars are doing this too, aren't they? Yeah. So what in that last section? I don't think the last section was 3, but here we are. Oh yeah, I think this whole song's been 3 then, no? I've been feeling this slower 4, 3, 4, 1, 2. 4, 1. That's what I've been feeling. But in that you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Another guitar riff for the first half is a bit more moving, and the back half is just the final 2 chords of the progression. Back to this. Ooh. So we had a 3 against 4 polymeter going on there, very reminiscent of the opening track of the album. Actually, that 3 against 4 is still here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The cymbals like to work with the 4, but there's groupings of 3 everywhere else. Oh, that just... Okay, we'll roll it over. I will say, though, I didn't recognize that at all. Here we go again, more of these effects.
All you ever wanted, all that you desire. Walk around, I'll take you higher. I feel your body shake. Put me on fire. All you ever wanted, all that you desire. All that you desire.
Very energetic. We have these fast syncopated bass kick ideas against the snare, really driving energy. Even the guitar sound is very large. It's not as weighty. This is a weight lifted off of the last few tracks. Yeah. The syncopated violin line lining up with the guitars, and we have the harsh vocals and the clean vocal. Oh, dude, I love the layering in that section.
I'll chase your scary monsters on the run. With me, you are safe. I'm in control.
I think this is the part that reminds me most of goth rock. Especially something like My Dying Bride. It's pushing into that realm of almost being too dramatic. No. The snare on 2 and 4 almost gives it too much forward energy. I think if it was on 1 and 3, it would have reined it into the now a little bit more. It almost gives it a little bit of a dancey vibe, especially with those syncopated bass kicks. Like, this brings the energy back down where the album's mostly been. I do like this section though. This is so well done. Just that wide gap between the cleans and the harshes. Yes, man. If there was ever an album that did not need a dance beat to it, this would be it. It continues to surprise me when it shows up. This song is very high energy, lots of syncopation, very bouncy. You can't help but move and groove to it. I'm glad that that big, almost breakdown shows up after the first half of the chorus. But I mean, that first part of the chorus, it makes you want to groove. The snare on 2 and 4, the syncopated bass kicks, the brighter guitar tone, the high energy of the chord progression. It doesn't carry that dreariness with it. And I really hope that this song ends up being a bit more of a positive take lyrically, but given the mishmash and opposing thematic components of Lost, I'm really not banking on that too much. It wouldn't surprise me if, despite the upbeat, bouncier feelings in the song, that the lyrics still tend to be a bit more depressing, as the album has been. Not to mention that the next track is called Crushed Dreams, so it'd be really odd to have the uplift here as the denouement to the album, where we're going to plummet back into negativity and depression to wrap the album up. This type of uplift you would want at the end, a moment of hopeful clarity at the end of a depressive album. Not, not the soft pitch right before the home run of depression. It's, I don't know. This song feels kind of odd to me, and for every moment that I think feels very sincere and rooted in its depression, it's followed up with something that's a bit too absurd and melodramatic. Even at one point, I mean, I literally chuckled at the shift in the middle of the song into the bridge with the choir coming in, and I don't like laughing at things that I think are supposed to be taken seriously, but it comes off really comical to me. Just the way that everything ends up getting juxtaposed there as we move from one idea to the other, and just kind of have to accept this drastic emotional change. And again, it's time. I think part of it's mood as well. I'm very rarely in a mood for depressive music, so taking it seriously and at its face value is not something I can always do. Melodrama, especially depressive melodrama, can certainly err on the side of absurdity for me more often than not, because it's just really, well, no, because here's the other thing, right? I like emo lyrics. What is the difference between Gothic lyrics and emo lyrics, and why do Gothic lyrics tend to feel absurd to me where emo ones don't? Is it the musical context more often than not? Me feeling at home with emo and being able, kind of in the mindset to take it more seriously on the surface? I don't know. That might have something to do with it. But it's not like I have been, in a sense, dismissive of the lyrical component of this album on the whole. Most of the songs I have taken at face value and have approached as seriously as I can. It's really just this one and Lost that have kind of stood out to me as being a bit taking melodrama to a camp level where it becomes comical almost. To me, again, I'm not saying that their intentions were comical or that their execution is inherently comical. It's simply how I'm reading them. But then, like I said, on the other side of the equation, we do have that really killer breakdown section, and I love that. The way that the violins and the guitars are giving us this really meaty, syncopated staccato idea in the center channel. They're layering up this large gap between the two instruments pitch-wise, also the texture layering between the two of them, and then that is paired and juxtaposed with the harsh vocals and operatic vocals that are also being texture layered. And there's minor changes in there too, where the operatic vocals have a few more notes than the harsh ones to kind of give them a little bit of a counterpoint style in the middle of a generally harmony based melody. It's a very cool moment. We have great use of space there. It feels heavy and there's a lot of impact hitting this coming from the last section, which has a bit more of that drive and syncopated bounciness to it. It feels like a weight. It almost feels like it's saying, hey, why is this so dancey? Why is it so bouncy? What are we doing with this high energy? And just immediately, grabbing the steering wheel and directing the song into a vastly different direction, one that I think fits the rest of the album much better. I don't necessarily think that's what their aim was, but the drastic shift into something that I feel is more thematically resonant feels like that section is just taking the reins away from the rest of the song. And that moment just really stands out to me. I think that's going to be something that sticks with me for a while. You can't pick and choose what gets stuck in your head. Last week we checked out Emily Autumn, and I was a little harsh on one of the later tracks called Lyre, and the chorus has been stuck in my head this whole week. It's not the only one. Opheliac's chorus also is stuck in my head. That song is just phenomenal. But Lyre's oh no, Lyre was in the beginning of the track, wasn't it? It was like track 4, beginning of the album. Anyways, I was kind of harsh on it, but it is the one that ended up getting stuck in my head, and I'm kind of growing on that chorus now. So I would like for this section here to be the one that sticks with me in this album. I think it's one of their better ideas, executed fantastically and works well in context. But you can't choose. You can't choose what's the earworm. It just goes in there and gets stuck. But yeah, so like this song's a bit weird for me, and some parts I think work and others don't. But I find it wild. Now, I get called out on this. I don't use Spotify metrics as a catch-all to talk about anything objectively. I just think it's an interesting point of data. It is not data that tells the whole story, especially for an album that came out years before Spotify even existed. But I still like to look at it as a type of data point to understand the listening habits of people who hear this album. It's interesting to see how many people stick around for an album. I think that works well when the plays diminish over the course of the album. But something like this, it almost feels like people have specific favorites, as there really is no pattern of drop-off. The most listened to track is exactly in the middle of the album, and it is surrounded by some of the least listened to tracks. It feels like an album that people tend to listen to in playlist formats, pulling out specific songs they like. For instance, the second and third tracks are the most listened to after the fifth. The first is in the lower end of things. And the one that I think I'm resonated most with, other than the first, which I really liked, was Hatred Grows, number 7, which is the least listened to. World of Glass has twice as many listens as Hatred Grows, and I think Hatred Grows is a much more cohesive track. I think it has more fully fleshed out ideas. The ideas tend to work well with each other throughout the song. It flowed better than World of Glass. I haven't hit lyrics yet. Maybe World of Glass has better lyrics, which is why it's listened to more. I don't know. Maybe it's the use of harsh vocals in World of Glass where we got less of them in Hatred Grows. But uh, Hatred Grows is in the same place as Lost as far as plays. They are at the bottom, the least listened to songs according to Spotify. And they couldn't be further in intention, execution, sound. It's kind of wild to me. Like I said, I don't think it's indicative of much of anything, but it is interesting to find patterns in the modern listening of this album. With all that said, though, I did like Hatred Grows, and there is, I think, one of the first uses of staccato clean vocals in the album that I thought worked really well here. It's a great juxtaposition to the longer, more flourishy and flowery use of operatic vocals that we've heard across this album, where they're typically juxtaposed with harshes whenever we wanted something a bit more rhythmic or rhythmically active. And this was one of the strong points in differentiating the two vocals was their approach to rhythm, where the operatic ones tend to hold out syllables and the harsh vocals tended to quickly move through syllables or to say a word and then have some space, and not really hold sounds out. We don't really have long growls anywhere on this album. It's just more of a tighter rhythmic experience, and that's one of the ways that they're just heavily separated. And so to hear the operatic vocals have these quick, short staccato notes back to back, I thought was very cool, and it worked well with the music around it. It flowed well from where we came from. It was a neat little movement from the more legato style of singing to the staccato style. It was just a very cool movement. I'd say that the guitar work in here is expected, but we do have a cool little guitar riff in here that I thought was pretty memorable. It's, like I said, it's kind of wild that this is one of the least listened to tracks, given that everything kind of works in here. It is still very atmospheric, too. It doesn't get rid of that in order to have some more driving guitar riffs. It doesn't get rid of that to change up the vocal style at all. And we didn't have a moment of a bridge introducing a new idea to toss it out immediately. That does mean that we didn't get a cool violin idea or synthesizer idea, expanding the harmonic palette in any direction. I do miss that from some of the earlier tracks, but I think I would trade that for cohesion, which I think Hatred Grows is one of the most cohesive tracks on the album. It also starts with some really beautiful playing. I don't remember if that was operatic melody or if that was violin melody. I mean, we're talking like 15-20 minutes ago of a totally different song. World of Glass is a lot clearer in my mind, which is why I try not to group songs together too much unless I just really don't have a lot to say about one. If they didn't bleed into each other the way they did, I probably would have stopped there, but it sounded like they wanted to be heard together, so I let that play out. But there was some cool, beautiful melody writing at the beginning of Hatred Grows. And I've been asking for more of that. I think Tender Trip on Earth was the last time we got something like that. That was absolutely gorgeous. I think that was it. It was one of those songs in the middle of the album where we had like a 4-piece. It was Tender Trip on Earth, wasn't it? All the acoustic instruments. Yeah. Dude, that was a beautiful intro. And I think Hatred Grows kind of builds off of that in a very different direction, albeit, and without all of the intricate moving parts, but still showcasing a little bit of that melodic writing that we don't actually see too much of. We get more of the ostinato based loops in the vocals, but it isn't, except for a few of the violin solos, we don't really get to see much of the linear melody writing, and they're so good at it. I really wish it was more present. And there's plenty of places I think it could be added to songs. Plenty of places where I think there's room, there's space, both compositionally and sonically, to add melodically driven ideas. Whether that is just to add a new line or to create counterpoint or counter melody or anything. I think there's plenty of room for it. And I think it's a shame that they're obviously fantastic at writing melodies and they don't use that skill as often as I would like them to. I did mention that after selling out, I would look a little bit into. Actually, it was Deadlocked, wasn't it? That I would look a little bit into their, their Wikipedia history and whatever annotation I could find on their general page on Genius and stuff like that. There's honestly not a lot of information written about this album in actually at all. None of these songs have annotations on Genius, by the way. All the interpretations are 100% mine. Usually I'll say, hey, I read this in an annotation, right? I like to give credit where credit's due. I haven't said that at all today because there's not a single word there's not a single line in what we've seen so far that has any additional context provided by the users of Genius. So there's very little description other than what you would find in metadata. This is their third album. It came out in this year. It had these people on it. I did read that their harsh vocalist had just left or something, and they had to get the vocalist from another group for this album. Where was that piece of was that Wikipedia? It must have been. I'll pull that up when I look at lyrics real quick. I don't want to take people's time searching for stuff that I can do off camera. But other than that, there's really not much I've found about this album other than a ton of praise from the Rate Your Music community, with many people calling this one of, or even sometimes the best album of 2001. I don't want to put a lot of time into this since I don't think it's analytical in any way, but I do think it's an interesting perspective, particularly from where I stand. I think this is a solid album. I think that they have done a great job at capturing a specific vibe and exploring it. There's a couple of what I think are missteps in exploring that vibe where we do have songs that work well in isolation but feel kind of weird in context of all the songs that surround it. But I wouldn't say that this is a bad album in any way, but I'm also failing to see where this is fantastic. And when it comes to older albums, it might just be the climate of things. Once again, I don't think this is particularly strong because there's a lot of places where I could see it being different, busier, more complex. I was going to say better, but better is subjective. But a lot of that, as I mentioned earlier, could be informed of how progressive metal has evolved over the years. And so it's not necessarily fair to judge a 2001 album by standards that might have come after it. So it's quite possible that, again, as I think I've mentioned this earlier, if I listened to this in 2001, I might have been just as blown away, not knowing anything else, that would have come after it in either the progressive metal, symphonic metal, doom metal, gothic metal, any of that would have come after that might have been influenced and refined down what Tristania was doing here. I'm also not that huge of a fan of gothic metal, which probably plays into that just a little bit, So, like I said, it's an interesting perspective. I think it's very cool to find an album that people hold in high regard that just doesn't quite click with me. And a lot of it could just be the context that surrounds it. We ran into this with the Beatles last month. I'd say, give or take. I think it was like 4 or 5 weeks ago. And we checked out their last album, and I was like, it's a solid album, but it's not great. It's got some catchy songs on it, but best of all time, one of the best they've ever done. But it really depends on knowing the context around it, of understanding what rock was like at the time of what they were doing. I did an entire second video about the context I learned about the album from all of you and kind of changing my perspective on it a little bit. And that could be what's happening here as well. The context is why this was important for 2001, and maybe it just hasn't quite aged as well for somebody who doesn't have the nostalgia and context of the time. Also, though, not a big goth metal fan, so maybe even knowing the context, it still wouldn't change much of the album for me. It's a solid listen. I haven't disliked any moment really of the album so far. I mean, we only have one track left. I think I can make a pretty strong closing idea right here. I've enjoyed it. This isn't one of those albums that I'm like, come on, just one more song, let's get it over with. No, I'm enjoying my time with it, but it's not something I would come back to, and it's not something that, other than a few moments, that I think I would ever think about again. But by no means would I say that there's any issues with it, aside from a couple big moments I've talked about plenty. So let me dive into some lyrics for these two. We'll hit the last song, I'll give my closing thoughts, and y'all can get out of here. I say that like, this is a class and you're waiting for the lecture to end. Why would I even say that? So, some interesting stuff on the personnel side of things. I went to just look up the harsh vocalist, who is Ronnie Thorson from Trail of Tears. He did the harsh vocals for this album on all of the songs except for The Shining Path and Tender Trip of Earth. However, we also had a clean vocalist called Øystein Bergøy, who was a session musician, actually would get picked up for clean vocals on the next album to be a permanent member of the band. Now, between Øystein and Einar is the synth player. They wrote a majority of the songs. They worked together to write the lyrics for the first track, and then Bergøy wrote the lyrics for 5 other tracks, with Einar writing lyrics for 2 of the other tracks. That only makes 8 tracks, though. Track number 4. The lyrics were written by the violinist, a session musician, not a permanent member of the band. And I mentioned that Lost's lyrics were a huge departure from the lyrics the band had written up to that point, and as far as I'm concerned, they still sort of stand out a bit. That song as a whole stands out a bit, but I totally called it that it had a different lyricist. But I do think it's interesting that the lyrics are written by the synth player and a member of who was a member of this album who wasn't even a part of the band. Now, obviously, they enjoyed his singing and his lyrics enough to pull him on for the next album too, but you don't see that too often. Usually your vocalist or your lead composer is going to write the lyrics for your album, not somebody outside of the band. I think that's a pretty cool thing that happened on this album. Now, speaking of departures, though, Hatred Grows is very different lyrically in tone from everything else. Most of what we've explored today is depression, or finding a little light amongst depression. It's all been a really negative album overall. And while this is still negative, it's in a completely different perspective. It's about the violence of war. This kind of comes out of nowhere. Nothing could have prepared me for this. It starts off out of the dim. The ships were closing in. Warriors worrying, painted to kill. Kill and be killed more than fight to survive. I'll give you strength to continue the fight. I'll feed your anger and soft little lies. Out of blood, hatred grows. There's no place to hide. I'll be your shining star. I'll be your guide. It's kill or be killed. And it's sort of painted from the perspective of a ruler or a king telling everyone else to go fight his war, and I will be what gives you energy. Now, I do think, because of a specific line in here, it says, seeking the courage to stand up and fight, the war drums resounding from ships out of sight. My God is great, I've killed before, all is fair in love and war and peace. I'm not a huge fan of that. They had the rhyme going, and then they didn't stop there. That feels a bit strange to me. But the idea that my God is great, this shows up at the end of the song, and I think it paints who the I is at the beginning, being a shining star and a guide. This could be a song about how religion has led to so many wars and the death of so many people. it kind of fits with the anti-religious vibes that we've had even from the beginning of the album, but it does feel a little out of place here after so many songs about depression. I thought it kind of worked at the beginning of the album as we were sort of bouncing around between ideas, but the album solidifies itself in this very doomy gothic feel for so long that jumping back to this anti-religious rhetoric and exploring how it's the cause for so much violence, again, it's another song that I think works well outside of the context of the album, but feels weird within it. I think it would have been really odd to have it be the penultimate song, and I'm glad that there's 2 more tracks ahead of it, and that we didn't kind of wrap up the album on this note. That said, let's dive into the next set of lyrics for World of Glass. And we're actually sticking with this anti-religious rhetoric here. In fact, where the last track said, "My God is great," we didn't stick with the Christian capital G God. It was just the general form of deity. But here we're back to the capital G. It says, "Who's the prey and what's the play? God created, stay with me. We are the ones God hated. All you ever wanted, all that you desire, walk the line with me. I'll take you higher. I feel your body shake, put me on fire. All you ever wanted, all that you desire." I don't know what this means. I don't know what any of this means. For an album that's been pretty clear to me, very surface level stuff, they say exactly what they mean and it's easy to pick up what the songs are about. I'm not sure what is the concept of who's the prey and what's the play? How does that relate to religion, which is what I kind of assume we're talking about here? It says, "All that you've ever wanted and desire, I will take you higher." Are we talking again about the Christian God here? Or not, or something else? But he also says that I'm a falling stone in a world of glass. I feel like this is important because we've used the title of the song in this line. Also says I'm a ticking bomb with a smiling mask. I read this as being a disruptor of sorts, and that I'm happy about the destruction I create. I am destroying the facade of religion, or the facade that religion has put up, and I'm allowing you to see it for what it is. But I don't know how that lines up with anything else in here. And immediately after that, it says, "I'll play you like a violin. You will be my queen and I will be the king. I'll chase your scary monsters on the run. With me you are safe." Is this about the control that God has over people? Playing them like a violin means to manipulate them, but then it also seems positive. I'll be your king, I'll chase your scary monsters away, you're safe with me, I'm in control. The idea of control permeating through the perspective of religion, I think we can kind of go in that direction, but I don't know. It's like so many different ideas, and I just have a tough time understanding how they all relate to each other. The song ends with, "Can you see them? Can you hear them? Can you feel them? Do you fear them? Can you ever let go?" And I don't know who the them is in this section. Letting go I can apply to pretty much anything in here. It's a vague enough idea that can be applied to any of the plethora of directions I see this song going in, but it feels very scattered, very fractured, like a stone crashing into a world of glass. But I don't necessarily think that that's a good description for this, because it seems that it wants to point everything towards a specific direction, and it just doesn't feel that focused, at least to me. I would love to pull this back into the song, but I don't know. The song was kind of powerful in a lot of ways, very upbeat. This is definitely less depressive lyrically, but I don't necessarily think it's a positive or upbeat song either. This is a little shaky ground to move into the end of the album with. I tend to like to approach the final track with a little bit more understanding of what we're exploring. It's yeah. Here's something interesting though, is that so many places, including Rate Your Music, say that there is a ninth song here called The Modern End. Not Crushed Dreams. When I looked it up on Wikipedia, this is actually part of the Digipack, a second release, and it's a cover from a band called Siegmund. I have determined that it's a bonus track of sorts. It did not show up on the original release, but I think it's wild that Rate Your Music, which tends to do a pretty good job of categorizing every single release and what kind of bonus tracks are on what releases, still have The Modern End and a 10-track list for the original release when it doesn't seem to have been that way. Although maybe the original release did have a Digipack version, and it wouldn't have been a bonus, like deluxe edition of any way. But I also, because it's a cover, I've decided not to include it. Not to mention that it's not on Spotify. Spotify only has the 9-track listing, which ends on Crushed Dreams as track 9, rather than have The Modern End in there. So just for anybody who has listened to this, maybe exclusively as a 10-track album, that is why we are only looking at 9 tracks. Alright, let's dive into this final one. Crushed Dreams. See where this takes us. I'm kind of thinking we're going to go back to the gothic, depressive, blackened heart kind of stuff that we saw earlier, which again makes the shift back to religious context for 7 and 8 a little awkward, but I don't know, maybe they'll play it out better than I'm picturing. Oh, this is also the longest track by quite a long stretch. The previous longest was track 1 at 6:46, and this is 7:40. Is this the first time we're hearing non-operatic vocals from our primary vocalist? There's still a nice vibrato at the end, but a lot of these notes are just held. That synth work, man. It's unique, I'll give it that. The reverb, the panning, the chirpiness, like all the effects, it's overdone for my tastes. Yeah. The layering on that harsh to widen it out. Yeah, we got bass movement here. I mean, it's a one bar idea, but it's nice. Ooh, bringing that eeriness in. response is interesting. Fun rhythmic ideas. Very powerful full vocals here. Fun little cymbal work over here, every second bar out of 4. Yeah, you heard that? The offbeat accents on the glockenspiel sounding instrument. Very strict and powerful. I love it. This is a weird... Harmonically, it goes out of all the nuances. Back to the dance beat. I kind of get the vibe here. The choir kind of evens out the campiness of the dance beat, but that crunchy synth off on the side too. Oh, I love that little downward movement on the strings in the back. Right here. Sorry, what? And this is the A section from earlier, just after the intro. We're going to end this out on a fade out of this choir. I mean, we still have a minute left, but I think they're going to stick with it. They like their extended outros. Right, immediately called out. Respect. Yeah. Yeah, lovely melody here. The difference between the bright pluckiness of the melody with the heavy weight of the guitars underneath it. It was a fade out though. I did get that right. I should have suspected though that they weren't going to go with the minute long fade out like we had heard on a couple of other tracks, primarily because this is not like other tracks. There's a lot of everything in here. I love when a band brings all of their different ideas together and forms a nice cohesive song to wrap an album up, to sort of explore everything that they had over the course of the artwork. And so we did get some of the more atmospheric and gloomy side. We did get some of the more driving metallic ideas. We did get some of the awkward electronic dance stuff going on. We got operatic cleans, we got growls, we got layered stuff, we got call and response. It's a little bit of everything, and it really captures the entire mood of the album. I don't, jeez, I don't know if this would be the best introduction to World of Glass for somebody, but if somebody was like, I only have time for one song, what does World of Glass have in store for me? This would be the track to show them. With the caveat that it's a lot of a lot. It's not always cohesive, but if you like any one part of this, there's a whole song for you on this album somewhere. And I'm just a huge fan of that. I think it's a great way to wrap an album up, is to just bring it all together, to put a nice bow around it all and turn it into a package rather than a disparate group of ideas. Especially if it's not a concept album in the narrative sense. You still kind of want to wrap the album up as a whole, and this is a good way to do it, to kind of tie everything together on, if nothing else, a compositional level. And I really love that. And beyond that, I do think that this song has some of the best ideas for all of these parts. As far as the vocal layering, we don't really have call and response anywhere on this album, so it was a treat to hear it here. Counterpoint as well, we have very few moments of it on this album. It was great to hear here. Having the harshes and cleans working together in tandem, in opposition, just some of the best vocal melody writing we have seen on the album, period. As far as some of the guitar riffage, there's a lot in here that is chord based, but we also have their kind of signature idea of the first two bars is moving riffs, the second two bars is the last two chords of your progression, and you do a little bit of chord shaping and then straight up playing chords. And we see a lot of that here too, and I think that the chordal movement in the first half of these is some of the best they've written, the catchiest ideas on the album. The drumming here is solid. It's not quite as expressive as the first track. It mostly sits here and keeps the tempo. It's a human metronome in a lot of places, much like most of the album, but we do have some pretty neat cymbal work that we sparsely see across the album, so I'm also kind of tempted to say this has the best drum work of the album on this track. The synth still overdoes it, especially with that opening springy sound with all the reverb and the panning. Too much production. Yeah, that's on the album too. No, I mean that is there, and I wasn't a big fan of it. But I do think that on the whole, the synthesizer player reins it in a little bit, and the synth parts end up being quite a bit more tasteful across this song than in some others. But you do have a little bit of taste of that because the album has some too. Bass work, we got some great lead bass lines in here, just really getting to hear the bass. Not really taking a lead melody, but just being present in the mix, really being able to hear the tone, and there is movement to that bass idea, especially the one at the beginning. Granted, it was a one bar concept, but still got to hear it, and it was moving. It wasn't just root tone. So we don't actually get to hear a lot of that, which just immediately makes this one of the best bass songs on the album. And that covers everything, right? Oh, the violin. I don't think it was the best violin solo, but it was still exceptionally solid. I love the emotion put into it. It wasn't just the melody, which is what I've praised mostly about the violin across this album, but it was the performance of it, the dynamic qualities, the contrasting elements of how you play the notes, not just the notes themselves, not just the harmonic component, but the performance itself, and really digging in and playing, bowing these strings with a little bit of extra grit and harshness to them to represent this angst, this anger, or whatever it was supposed to be. Just some really gnarly violin playing at the beginning of the song, on top of really great melody. So yeah, this might be the best. Well, no, it's not the best, because what was there was one song with two violin solos in it. Was that Hatred Grows? That one. Whatever song that was, that's probably my favorite as far as violin solos go. And that's everything then. Oh, and the choir. I think the choir is pretty consistent. It does what it does similarly very well all the time. But even here, we got moving guitar, choir, clean vocals, and harsh vocals all at the same time doing different things, kind of bringing back the idea of the opening to Tender Trip on Earth with all the moving parts interlocking there. We didn't have those same instruments, but we had that same compositional context on this track. So yeah, you really get a little bit of everything, and I'd even say that for most of these individual ideas, they're best represented here on Crushed Dreams, which is actually really interesting, because Crushed Dreams would shatter and fragment. World of Glass was about shattering glass, creating fragments. This song contains a fragment of every other song compositionally. Maybe not thematically, but little pieces of every song come together to create this song. If this is the dream, then the other 8 tracks are the crushed pieces, the shattered elements of them. I don't know if that's necessarily what they were going for. This probably isn't a concept album, at least not narratively in any sense. I do see some recurring patterns of themes, but I don't know if I could really tie all that together, because we do have 2 separate themes. It feels like they sometimes have some crossover, such as The Shining Path, where we see religious elements and depression together, but for the most part, those 2 themes are separated on the album. Although, the fact that the few songs that are anti-religious also deal with the negative components of religion could also be seen from an aspect of depression, if we assume that some sort of maybe even the lyricist, right, was at one point a Christian person and became disillusioned with the religion, and that's kind of sent them into a bit of a spiral or something along those lines, in which case we can kind of pull the 2 themes together in a sense, the fragmenting and fracturing of one's personality as they grow up and dismiss their upbringing. But that feels grasping at straws quite a bit, as I don't think enough of this album could support that read, even if it's something that you could maybe start as a jumping off point on here and kind of cherry pick some stuff to support it. But yeah, the idea that this song has fragments of all the other ones and it's called Crushed Dreams, I think it's pretty cool. With that said, though, this song is also the most chaotic, because it contains little pieces of everything else. It's not quite cohesive, and the harsh transitions feel more jarring in this song than many others, because the atmosphere is also changing, because the instrumentation is also changing. It's what I mentioned about Shining Path in the opposite, where I said that song, despite having the harsh changes, kind of still felt cohesive because of the overarching atmosphere. This doesn't. That atmosphere that keeps everything held together is gone. Every section has its own atmosphere. Every section has its own tempo and group of instruments and feeling and vibe and rhythm and all of it. And so it does feel like a bunch of disparate ideas just smashed together. It never quite feels like a whole. In a sense, it's like all those fragments found and pushed together, but the cracks still present. You can't fix dreams that have been crushed, just like you really can't fix a mirror that has been shattered. You can put the pieces back in, but making it look whole again? Yeah, That's not going to happen. So maybe that's what they're aiming for here, for you to be able to see the cracks between the fragments. Thematically, that's pretty cool. I can get behind that artistically. As a song, though, especially since some of the sections didn't quite work for me, I don't think the song ultimately is one of my favorites on this one. In fact, I think if I had to pick a favorite, it'd probably still be Hatred Grows. And that's, I mean, it's their most cohesive track. It's the one that speaks to me the most, but it's also not a song I think I really want to listen to again. Maybe once more just to get a good read on it, but it's definitely not something that's going to get stuck in my head where I have to return to it, in a month or two. Although, like I said, you never know what gets stuck into your head. So it's quite possible I'll be eating my words in 2 months. I'll put on Mastodon. All right, y'all were right. I woke up and Hatred Grows chorus was stuck in my head. I had to go listen to it again today. And I think that's where I sit on this album. I've kind of already wrapped up my thoughts in my last analysis segment, but it's a solid album. And there's a lot of moments in it that I feel could make it a timeless one. But there's just too many decisions that I think hold it back. It never quite feels like it reached the greatness it could have been, at least from my opinion on it. And there's moments that I think it's not even just about not taking that extra step, but actually taking a step backwards that kind of hold it back. And a lot of that has to do with the synth player. I think, again, that the composition for the synth lines is fine. And certain instruments or tones work really well, but there's also just as many decisions that had me scratching my head wondering why that was the direction they went. And then you remember it's 2001, and that's actually kind of the sonic landscape for goth industrial of the time, and they were just replicating that sound, which unfortunately heavily dates the album in a way. An album feeling of its time isn't always necessarily bad, but like I said, they were right on the cusp of having something timeless. Something that I think would have lasted the test of time. Stood the test of time really well, and ends up kind of faltering right at the finish line, unfortunately. I'm going to check out some lyrics for this final Crushed Dreams, and then we're going to wrap the video up. And it's funny that I was talking about merging these two lyrical themes of the more depressive side of things and the anti-religion component, because that's what this song does really well. As it brings all the musical themes together, it also brings the lyrical ones. This is a song about how God has made this person's life terrible by telling them that everything that brings them joy, all of their dreams, what they want to accomplish in life, is sin. That anything you like, you should not be doing. And once again, we have a song that kind of says that they're ready to die if this is what life is, especially life in a religious context. Kind of bringing the concepts of depression and suicide and anti-religion all together. It says, preparing for death, awaiting the light to shine on us, wishing the sun to fall down on our heads, show us the joy in the world that we're living in, and turn our dreams into sin. So, show us everything that makes us happy and tell us that it's the worst things in the world. And that's going to have an effect on someone's psyche. It's going to alter the way that they feel, especially if they're told that from a young age. And so there's just a lot of anti-God rhetoric in here. You can go in and look if you want. This is another one of those really lengthy poems. There's quite a bit of repetition in it, but there's also some 17 or 18 stanzas. So there's a lot going on here. But I really like the end of it. It says, lift this prayer to heaven's height as we walk the path, this shining path, bringing back the title of the opening track. It says, feed my mind with the most glorious thoughts, sacrificing all of my dreams, I will serve and honor to death, or do I just fear the tyrant's wrath? So it's a little tongue-in-cheek here. Okay, you know what? I'll praise you, right? You're the most glorious. Let me know what's up. I will dedicate my life to you. But in doing this, I will sacrifice all of my dreams. Do I really want this, or am I just fearing the wrath of this tyrant? And I think that's an interesting way to portray the Christian God. I mean, it's literally do as I say or burn for eternity. And if that's not a tyrant, you tell me what is. After this, we have Latin brought back again. The second time in the album. And where did... Oh, I was like, I literally had this tab open a second ago and I did not close it. It translates to dead in the soul. Once upon a time I had a beautiful existence, it was just black. The fate of salvation, I speak my mind, I am carried away as it were. This feels a bit odd. I don't know if that is Google Translate's translation of it just being a bit awkward, but I think the idea is it's beautiful. It says that I'm dead now, but things were better at some time before. It might have been before the complexity of all of this. He says, now I will speak my mind and be carried away by it. I will act in defiance and find power through that, wherever that may take me. If that leads me to execution, such as the witch burning at the beginning. Actually, whoa, I was not expecting to make that connection, but it says, are you a beast of Satan or something along those lines during the witch burning song. Oh, ho, ho. Yeah, this is a bit more conceptual than I thought. Definitely not an overarching narrative or anything like that, but the themes are more tightly linked than I think I had originally expected or even noticed. But yeah, it says, I'll speak my mind, carried away wherever that takes me. That is my fate of salvation, not in the traditional Christian sense, but in my sense, to be free of this oppression. I will be saved from it. And if that's because I speak my mind and live my life my way, or if I speak my mind and get killed for it, I will still find salvation from this oppression. And that's how the album ends. Finally, a moment of sort of peace. It's something we've alluded to before. Even in the witch burning song, it was still about the defiance till the very end. There was no pleading, there was no lowering oneself. It was still self-respect. If this is how I'm going out, then that's how I'm going out. Whatever. And so we kind of see that come full circle, but this one, it's still a defiance, but it's a peace through that. It's a way of finding positivity and joy in the defiance, not just for the pure sake of standing up to it, but in trying to find hope through that. It is a nice way to sort of wrap things up, even if I think the song itself ends up being more thematically chaotic. I would have liked more of a narrative told through the story, through the music. Maybe starting out a bit darker, and as we push towards these lyrics, we have some sort of uplift. Maybe not something super hopeful and happy. I think that wouldn't fit well with the album, but still trying to... it could even just be the choir or the clean vocals, the operatic vocals piercing through this really heavy weight of metal music. Just having a way of cutting through the darkness and finding light without necessarily going for a schlocky happy ending, But, the song ends up being a bit more progressive, which is interesting because I've been asking for that all day. And honestly, there are some cool twists and turns in the music that I liked on this track, but the chaotic elements and constant twists and turns is not my favorite type of progressive writing. And so, as with everything else, it's a little 50-50. There's parts in it I loved, there's parts in it I didn't, and there's a lot of it that was just fine. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't really like it, and, it's an album I've walked away from not really wanting to get to the next track very quickly. I'm enjoying my time with it, which is usually a good thing. Very few albums on here I just love every moment of, and very few, fortunately, are ones that I just absolutely can't stand listening to, and I'm just forced to have 60 minutes of this crammed into my ear. That sits right in the middle. And that's usually the best I can ask for, and I'm quite happy to have an album like that where I can just enjoy it. Might not be something I revisit, but I didn't dislike being in that realm, in that story, in that musical atmosphere. So those are my thoughts. Tristania's World of Glass. What did you think of this album? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you just want to add your own perspective or opinion to this album. Let me know. Put all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though. 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC. We have a live stream going on. It lasts for 2 hours. Just come out, hang, we chit-chat, we listen to good music, we get into wild conversational tangents, somehow usually about language or genre. I have a lot of opinions about music genres too. But you know, we get off topic, all sorts of, we talk about video games and film and whatever. It's just a real chill time to explore some music and have some good conversation with good company. If you can't make that, or if you don't want to, though, Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual, we'll be starting off Spooky Week. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.